reading. I'm so excited. Let me make sure that everything's working. Guess I'll get this up. Are you ready? You ready for this? So excited. Hang on. Where is it? Nope, not that one. Shoot. Dun, 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 dun. Sorry. Oh, God. Anywho, I'm gonna put that on. And then... The Conte Fantastique. Why it's not working? Oh, it is working. Okay, excellent. So that's, yeah. Oh, shoot. Ah. So I believe, well, I guess I'll get my face next to the mic again. Okay, so I believe I have a plan for the rest of October if tonight goes well. So this is, so I was looking for horror stories, short enough for stream, as well as not too offensive or uncomfortable. At least with like to kind of stay away from that stuff. Just get the good literature. And apparently it is a little difficult to find. But I think I have a good plan here. What I was looking for first was, yeah. So I had a thought of reading the stories that I don't know if you're aware of the story of how like Frankenstein and the vampire were with a Y were written. It was a contest between the authors, the different authors, and that's how they came out. So I was gonna read those, but then Frankenstein is like 7 hours long to read. So what we're gonna do is hopefully these were the stories that they were reading, which inspired them to have their writing contest. It was Fantasmagoriana, which was it was a French book translated from a German book, and so I found the English translation. However, we'll get into it's also la la la. It's the red cover. Noom. Tales of the Dead. Noom. More Tales of the Dead, principally translated from the French. Graves at my command have waked their sleepers, oped and let them forth by my so potent art. Shakespeare. London, printed for White Cochrane and County Fleet Street, 1813, blah, blah, blah. So I read through these. They're kind of long, but basically... from the French translator. So basically, the French translator, I think, or if it was this Sarah, I think the translator into English. So it was Fantasmagoriana. So first it was a German book, then it was Fantasmagoriana, and then now it's Tales of the Dead. And so the Fantasmagoriana took some of the German stories and translated them. And then in here, it was said that she then took some of the stories from there and translated them, and then added one of her own at the end. So it's not a direct absolute translation from the German book and from the French book, and yeah. So that's that whole story, and then there was some good stuff in here. I should have, if I could have highlighted, but I don't think I can with this version. But yeah. And so I think it was maybe this part. Admitting, therefore, as an undoubted fact that with few exceptions, ghosts are no longer believed in, and that the species of fear we have just mentioned... Dang it, hang on. I'll maybe... Okay, hang on. I'll start reading, and then we'll just get into the good stuff. It is generally believed that at this time of day, no one puts any faith in ghosts and apparitions. Yet on reflection, this opinion does not appear to me quite correct. For, without alluding to workmen in mines and the inhabitants of mountainous countries, the former of whom believe in specters and hobgoblins presiding over concealed treasures, and the latter in apparitions and phantoms announcing either agreeable or unfortunate tidings. May we not ask why, amongst ourselves, there are certain individuals who have a dread of passing through a churchyard after nightfall? Why others experience an involuntary shuddering at entering a church or any other large uninhabited edifice in the dark? And in fine, why persons who are deservedly considered as possessing courage and good sense dare not visit at night even places where they are certain of meeting with nothing they need dread from living beings? They are ever repeating that the living are only to be dreaded, and yet fear night because they believe, by tradition, that it is the time which phantoms choose for appearing to the inhabitants of the earth. Admitting, therefore, as an undoubted fact that with few exceptions ghosts are no longer believed in, and that the species of fear we have just mentioned arises from a natural horror of darkness incident to man, a horror which he cannot account for rationally, yet it is well known that he listens with much pleasure to stories of ghosts, specters, and phantoms. The wonderful ever excites a degree of interest and gains an attentive ear. Consequently, all recitals relative to supernatural appearances please us. It was probably from this cause that the study of the sciences, which was in former times intermixed with the marvelous, is now reduced to the simple observation of facts. And then I think it gets into, like how it does, like the supernatural came out of like the sciences and how it's just subjectivity and blah. And then there was like, right at the end, it is no uncommon thing for a person of lively feelings to fancy he sees what never really existed. Yeah. So, I don't know. I just enjoyed those parts of it. I didn't want to read the whole thing. Just wanted to get right into it. The Tales of the Dead. Sorry. Okay. It's late, isn't it? Yeah. So Tales of the Dead. Here we go. Although, also, I have candy. It's orange for pumpkins. We'll see how this goes. Otherwise, I'll just stick it back into its wrapper. But I felt I could sit and ponder with it. So, thought I was going to say something else, but I think we're good. So, yes, just as a thing, if there does come up anything in here that is of the time, that's just the way it is. We'll try to just gloss over it and like enjoy it for what it is. Think we're gonna be fine, but we'll see. So, Tales of the Dead, number 1, the family portraits. No longer shall you gaze on't, lest your fancy may think anon it moves. The fixture of her eye has motion in it. Winter's Tale. I'm not sure I think I've read Winter's Tale. I've only just heard of it. Gotta get back to Shakespeare. Okay. Night had insensibly superseded day, when Ferdinand's carriage continued its slow course through the forest, the postilion uttering 1,000 complaints on the badness of the roads, and Ferdinand employing the leisure which the tedious progress of his carriage allowed, with reflections to which the purpose of his journey gave rise. As was usual with young men of rank, he had visited several universities, and after having traveled over the principal parts of Europe, he was now returning to his native country to take possession of the property of his father, who had died in his absence. Ferdinand was an only son, and the last branch of the ancient family of Meltheim. It was on this account that his mother was the more anxious that he should form a brilliant alliance, to which both his birth and fortune entitled him. She frequently repeated that Clotilde of Hainthal was of all others the person she should be most rejoiced to have as a daughter-in-law, and who should give to the world an heir to the name and estates of Meltheim. In the first instance, she merely named her amongst other distinguished females whom she recommended to her son's attention. But after a short period, she spoke of none but her, and at length declared rather positively that all... Sorry, my scroll's not working. And at length declared rather positively that all her happiness depended on the completion of this alliance, and hoped her son would approve her choice. Ferdinand, however, never thought of this union but with regret, and the urgent remonstrances which his mother ceased not to make on the subject only contributed to render Clotilde, who was an entire stranger to him, less amiable in his eyes. He determined at last to take a journey to the capital, whither Mr. Hainthal and his daughter were attracted by the carnival. I love carnival stories. gosh darn it. I've forgotten how to utilize this software. Were attracted by the carnival. He wished at least to know the lady, ere he consented to listen to his mother's entreaties. There we go. Sorry, I just won't use the scroll wheel. To his mother's entreaties, and secretly flattered himself that he should find some more cogent reasons for opposing this union than mere caprice, which was the appellation the old lady gave to his repugnance. Whilst traveling alone in his carriage as night approached the solitary forest, his imagination drew a picture. Whilst traveling alone in his carriage as night approached the solitary forest, his imagination drew a picture of his early life, which happy recollections rendered still happier. It seemed that the future presented no charms for him to equal the past, and the greater pleasure he took in retracing what no longer existed, the less wish he felt to bestow a thought on that futurity to which, contrary to his inclinations, he seemed destined. Thus, notwithstanding the slowness with which his carriage proceeded over the rugged ground, he found that he was too rapidly approaching the termination of his journey. The postilion at length began to console himself, for one half of the journey was accomplished, and the remainder presented only good roads. Ferdinand, however, gave orders to his groom to stop at the approaching village, determining to pass the night there. The road through the village which led to the inn was bordered by gardens, and the sound of different musical instruments led Ferdinand to suppose that the villagers were celebrating some rural fete. He already anticipated the pleasure of joining them, and hoped that this recreation would dissipate his melancholy thoughts. But on listening more attentively, he remarked that the music did not resemble that usually heard at inns, and the great light he perceived at the window of a pretty house from whence came the sounds that had arrested his attention did not permit him to doubt that a more select party than are accustomed to reside in the country at that unfavorable season were amusing themselves in performing a concert. The carriage now stopped at the door of a small inn of mean appearance. Ferdinand, who counted on much inconvenience and few comforts, asked who was the lord of the village. They informed him that he occupied a chateau situated in an adjoining hamlet. Our traveler said no more, but was obliged to content himself with the best apartment the landlord could give him. To divert his thoughts, he determined to walk in the village, and directed his steps towards the spot where he had heard the music. To this the harmonious sounds readily guided him. He approached softly, and found himself close to the house where the concert was performing. A young girl, sitting at the door, was playing with a little dog, who began to bark. Ferdinand, drawn from his reverie by the singular accompaniment, begged the little girl to inform him who lived in that house. "It is my father," she replied, smiling. "Come in, sir." And saying this, she slowly went up the steps. Ferdinand hesitated for an instant whether to accept this unceremonious invitation, but the master of the house came down, saying to him in a friendly tone, "Our music, sir, has probably been the only attraction to this spot. No matter, it is the pastor's abode, and to it you are heartily welcome. My neighbors and I," continued he, whilst leading Ferdinand in, "meet alternately at each other's houses once a week to form a little concert, and today it is my turn. Will you take a part in the performance, or only listen to it? Sit down in this apartment. Are you accustomed to hear better music than that performed simply by amateurs, or do you prefer an assemblage where they pass their time in conversation? If you like the latter, go into the adjoining room, where you will find my wife surrounded by a young circle. Here is our musical party. There is their I'll see if I can pronounce this. Conversazioni. Conversazioni." Saying this, he opened the door, made a gentle inclination of the head to Ferdinand, and seated himself before his desk. Our traveler would fain have made apologies, but the performers in an instant resumed the piece he had interrupted. At the same time, the pastor's wife, a young and pretty woman, entreated Ferdinand, in the most gracious manner possible, entirely to follow his own inclinations, whether they led him to remain with the musicians or to join the circle assembled in the other apartment. Ferdinand, after uttering some commonplace terms of politeness, followed her into the adjoining room. The chairs formed a semicircle around the sofa, and were occupied by several women and by some men. They all rose on Ferdinand's entering, and appeared a little disconcerted at the interruption. In the middle of the circle was a low chair, on which sat, with her back to the door, a young and sprightly female, who, seeing everyone rise, changed her position, and at sight of a stranger, blushed and appeared embarrassed. Ferdinand entreated the company not to interrupt the conversation. They accordingly reseated themselves, and the mistress of the house invited the new guest to take a seat on the sofa by two elderly ladies, and drew her chair near him. The music, she said to him, drew you amongst us, and yet in this apartment we have none. I hear it nevertheless with pleasure myself, but I cannot participate in my husband's enthusiasm for simple quartets and symphonies. Several of my friends are of the same way of thinking with me, which is the reason that while our husbands are occupied with their favorite science, we here enjoy social converse, which sometimes, however, becomes too loud for our virtuoso neighbors. Today I give a long promised tea drinking. Everyone is to relate a story of ghosts or something of a similar nature. You see that my auditors are more numerous than the band of musicians. Permit me, madam, replied Ferdinand, to add to the number of your auditors, although I have not much talent in explaining the marvelous. That will not be any hindrance to you here, answered a very pretty brunette, for it is agreed amongst us that no one shall search for any explanation, even though it bears the stamp of truth, as explanations would take away all pleasure from ghost stories. I shall benefit by your instructions, answered Ferdinand, but without doubt I interrupt a very interesting recital. Dare I entreat? The young lady with flaxen hair, who rose from— Hello, hello! Thank you! How is it going? I have to find it, sorry. Fried pierogi, thank you for the raid. And, I have to read it properly. D3049-3, thank you for the follow. Raid, thank you. We're reading spooky stories. So the story of Frankenstein. Oh, hello, thank you. Fried pierogi and Konu, thank you for following. What are you guys coming from? What were you doing? I would be curious to know. I appreciate the raid. I appreciate the follow. And I hope you're up for some spoopiness. Who is Jim? I don't know. Who is Jim? I don't know where that. Hang on. I don't see any Jim on this page. So I am not sure either. Unless that's what you're coming from. Is it a game or something? You were writing. Excellent. What were you writing? How's the stream so far? We just started. So we're just starting the is this an inside joke that I don't understand? We just started. So this guy is supposed to marry this girl, so he's going to see her cuz he doesn't know her yet. But he stopped in a village and he heard some music, so we went into the house and now they're telling spooky stories. So that's where we're at. We just started. And it is the English translation of the translation of what Lord Byron and Mary Shelley and all of those people were reading when they did their little contest that came out with the vampire and Frankenstein. So you apologize for your chat in advance. No worries. I'm sorry I don't understand the inside joke, I assume. You're writing a fantasy book. You just finished the outline today. Excellent. Cool. That's awesome. So do you write just for fun, or do you got stuff published yet, or are you on the way? You're great. Best viewer. Sounds good. All right. Good to know in advance. Hello. How's it going? Just dropped to say hello. You got to go to sleep. That's fine. I understand. It's good to see you. And yeah, hopefully at some point, we'll get more reading in. Because yeah, I'm so happy to be back with it. It's been a while. It's been a couple months. So yeah, hopefully at least we'll get some spoopy stories in for October. So yes, but hello. Good to see you. Hope you sleep well. You're hoping to publish it one day, but you have nothing out yet. Okay, sounds good. It will. It'll happen. You'll get there. It's going to be amazing. I'm so excited. Okay, well, I will. I'll keep going. No worry. Just let me know if there's anything else. I don't want to just not be doing the things that you potentially came here for. So, yes. So Ferdinand is our main character, and he just interrupted the people telling stories. So he's, I think, asking to have it said again. So the young lady with flaxen hair, who rose from the little seat, blushed anew, but the mistress of the house drew her by the arm, and laughing, conducted her to the middle of the circle. Come, child, said she, don't make any grimace, reseat yourself, and relate your story. This gentleman will also give us his. Ferdinand is an odd name. So yes, this is from the 1800s. It was written in German first, then translated to French, and then translated to English. So it's like it's from it's from a while ago. Who'd look at a baby and name it Ferdinand? Ferdinand's parents, whoever they may be. Do you promise to give us one, sir? Said the young lady to Ferdinand. He replied by a low bow. She then reseated herself in the place destined for the narrator, and thus began. One of my youthful friends, named Juliana, passed every summer with her family at her father's estate. The chateau was situated in a romantic country. High mountains formed a circle in the distance. Forests of oaks and fine groves surrounded it. It was an ancient edifice and had descended through a long line of ancestry to Juliana's father, for which reason, instead of making any alterations, he was only anxious to preserve it in the same state they had left it to him. Among the number of antiquities most prized by him was the family picture gallery, a vaulted room, dark, high, and of Gothic architecture, where hung the portraits of his forefathers, as large as the natural size, covering the walls which were blackened by age. Conformable to an immemorial custom, they ate in this room, and Juliana has often told me that she could not overcome, especially at supper time, a degree of fear and repugnance, and that she had frequently feigned indisposition to avoid entering this formidable apartment. Among the portraits there was one of a female who, it would seem, did not belong to the family, for Juliana's father could neither tell whom it represented, nor how it had become arranged amongst his ancestry. But as to all appearance, it had retained its station for ages. My friend's father was unwilling to remove it. Juliana never looked at this portrait without an involuntary shuddering, and she has told me that from her earliest infancy she has felt this secret terror, without being able to define the cause. Her father treated this sentiment as puerile, and compelled her sometimes to remain alone in that room. But as Juliana grew up, the terror this singular portrait occasioned increased, and she frequently supplicated her father, with tears in her eyes, not to leave her alone in that apartment. That portrait, she would say, regards me not gloomily or terribly, but with looks full of a mild melancholy. It appears anxious to draw me to it, and as if the lips were about to open and speak to me. That picture will certainly cause my death. Juliana's father at length relinquished all hope of conquering his daughter's fears. One night at supper, the terror she felt had thrown her into convulsions, for she fancied she saw the picture move its lips, and the physician enjoined her father in future to remove from her view all similar causes of fear. In consequence, the terrifying portrait was removed from the gallery, and it was placed over the door of an uninhabited room in the attic story. Juliana, after this removal, passed 2 years without experiencing any alarms. Her complexion resumed its brilliancy, which surprised everyone, for her continual fears had rendered her pale and wan. But the portrait and the fears it produced had alike disappeared, and Juliana— "Well," cried the mistress of the house, smiling, when she perceived that the narrator appeared to hesitate, "confess it, my dear child. Juliana found an admirer of her beauty. Was it not so?" "'Tis even so," resumed the young lady, blushing deeply. "She was affianced, and her intended husband coming to see her the day previous to that fixed on her— She was affianced, and her intended husband coming to see her the day previous to that fixed on for her marriage, she conducted him over the chateau, and from the attic rooms was shewing him the beautiful prospect which extended to the distant mountains. On a sudden, she found herself, without being aware of it, in the room where the unfortunate portrait was placed, and it was natural that a stranger, surprised at seeing it there alone, should ask who it represented. To look at it, recognize it, utter a piercing shriek, and run towards the door, were but the work of an instant with poor Juliana. But whether in effect owing to the violence with which she opened the door, the picture was shaken, or whether the moment was arrived in which its baneful influence was to be exercised over Juliana, I know not. But at the moment this unfortunate girl was striving to get out of the room and avoid her destiny, the portrait fell, and Juliana, thrown down by her fears and overpowered by the heavy weight of the picture, never rose more. A long silence followed this recital, which was only interrupted by the exclamations of surprise and interest excited for the unfortunate Juliana. Ferdinand alone appeared untouched by the general emotions. At length one of the ladies sitting near him broke the silence by saying, "This story is literally true. I knew the family where the fatal portrait caused the death of a charming young girl. I have also seen the picture. It has, as the young lady truly observed, an indescribable air of goodness which penetrates the heart, so that I could not bear to look on it long. And yet, as you say, its look is so full of tender melancholy, and has such infinite attractions, that it appears that the eyes move and have life. Hello, Governor. How's it going? We're reading spoopy stories today. A girl just died in a ghost story by a portrait. Oh, and this is what this one is called, by the way, the family portraits. So if that helps at all. So, in general, resumed the mistress of the house, at the same time shuddering, I don't like portraits, and I would not have any in the rooms I occupy. They say that they become pale when the original expires, and the more faithful the likeness, the more they remind me of those waxen figures I cannot look at without aversion. That is the reason, replied the young person who had related the history, that I prefer those portraits where the individual is represented occupied in some employment, as then the figure is entirely independent of those who look at it, whereas in a simple portrait the eyes are inanimmately fixed on everything that passes. Such portraits appear to me as contrary to the laws of illusion as painted statues. I participate in your opinion, replied Ferdinand, for the remembrance of a terrible impression produced on my mind when young by a portrait of that sort will never be effaced. Oh, pray relate it to us, said the young lady with flaxen hair, who had not as yet quitted the low chair. You are obliged, according to promise, to take my place. She instantly arose, and jokingly forced Ferdinand to change seats with her. This history, said he, will resemble a little too much the one you have just related. Permit me, therefore— That does not signify, resumed the mistress of the house. One is never weary with recitals of this kind, and the greater repugnance I feel in looking at these horrible portraits, the greater is the pleasure I take in listening to histories of their eyes or feet being seen to move. But seriously, replied Ferdinand, who would fain have retracted his promise, my history is too horrible for so fine an evening. I confess to you that I cannot think of it without shuddering, although several years have elapsed since it happened. So much the better, cried nearly all present. How you excite our curiosity. And its having happened to yourself will afford double pleasure, as we cannot entertain any doubt of the fact. It did not happen personally to me, answered Ferdinand, who reflected that he had gone too far, but to one of my friends, on whose word I have as firm a reliance as if I had been myself a witness to it. They reiterated their entreaties, and Ferdinand began in these words. One day, when I was arguing with the friend of whom I am about to make mention, on apparitions and omens, he told me the following story. I had been invited, said he, by one of my college companions, to pass my vacations with him at an estate of his father's. The spring was that year unusually late, owing to a long and severe winter, and appeared in consequence more gay and agreeable, which gave additional charms to our projected pleasures. We arrived at his father's in the pleasant month of April, animated by all the gaiety the season inspired. As my companion and I were accustomed to live together at the university, he had recommended to his family, in his letters, so to arrange matters that we might live together at his father's also. We in consequence occupied 2 adjoining rooms, from whence we enjoyed a view of the garden and a fine country, bounded in the distance by forests and vineyards. In a few days I found myself so completely at home in the house, and so familiarized with its inhabitants, that nobody, whether of the family or among the domestics, domestics, sorry, I thought that seemed wrong, or among the domestics, made any difference between my friend and myself. His younger brothers, who were absent from me in the day, often passed the night in my room, or in that of their elder brother. Their sister, a charming girl about 12 years of age, lovely and blooming as a newly blown rose, gave me the appellation of brother, and fancied that under this title she was privileged to shew me all her favorite haunts in the garden, to gratify my wishes at table, and to furnish my apartment with all that was requisite. Her cares and attention will never be effaced from my recollection. They will long outlive the scenes of horror that chateau never ceases to recall to my recollection. From the first of my arrival, I had remarked a huge portrait affixed to the wall of an antechamber, through which I was obliged to pass to go to my room. But, too much occupied by the new objects, which on all sides attracted my attention, I had not particularly examined it. Meanwhile, I could not avoid observing that, though the 2 younger brothers of my friend were so much attached to me, that they would never permit me to go at night into my room without them, yet they always evinced an unaccountable dread in crossing the hall where this picture hung. They clung to me and embraced me that I might take them in my arms, and whichever I was compelled to take by the hand invariably covered his face, in order that he might not see the least trace of the portrait. Being aware that the generality of children are afraid of colossal figures, or even of those of a natural height, I endeavored to give my two young friends courage. Ooh. It's a low-flying aircraft. Sorry. I don't know if you can hear it. However, on more attentively considering the portrait, which caused them so much dread, I could not avoid feeling a degree of fear myself. The picture represented a knight in the costume of a very remote period. A full gray mantle descended from his shoulders to his knees. One of his feet, placed in the foreground, appeared as if it was starting from the canvas. His countenance had an expression which petrified me with fear. I had never before seen anything at all like it in nature. It was a frightful mixture of the stillness of death with the remains of a violent and baneful passion, which not even death itself was able to overcome. One would have thought the artist had copied the terrible features of one risen from the grave in order to paint this terrific portrait. I was seized with a terror little less than the children whenever I wished to contemplate this picture. Its aspect was disagreeable to my friend, but did not cause him any terror. His sister was the only one who could look at this hideous figure with a smiling countenance, and said to me with a compassionate air, when I discovered my aversion to it, "That man is not wicked, but he is certainly very unhappy." My friend told me that the picture represented the founder of his race, and that his father attached uncommon value to it. It had in all probability hung there from time immemorial, and it would not be possible to remove it from this chamber without destroying the regularity of its appearance. Meanwhile, the term of our vacation was speedily drawing to its close, and time insensibly wore away in the pleasures of the country. The old count, who remarked our reluctance to quit him, his amiable family, his chateau, and the fine country that surrounded it, applied himself with kind and unremitting care to make the day preceding our departure a continual succession of rustic diversions. Each succeeded the other without the slightest appearance of art. They seemed of necessity to follow each other. The delight that illumined the eyes of my friend's sister when she perceived her father's satisfaction, the joy that was painted in Emily's countenance, which was the name of this charming girl, when she surprised even her father by her arrangements, which outstripped his projects, led me to discover the entire confidence that existed between the father and daughter, and the active part Emily had taken in directing the order which reigned in that day's festivities. Night arrived, the company in the gardens dispersed, but my amiable companions never quitted my side. The two young boys skipped gaily before us, chasing the May-bug and shaking the shrubs to make them come out. The dew arose, and aided by the light of the moon, formed silver spangles on the flowers and grass. Emily hung on my arm, and an affectionate sister conducted me, as if to take leave, to all the groves and places I had been accustomed to visit with her, or with the family. On arriving at the door of the chateau, I was obliged to repeat the promise I had made to her father, of passing some weeks in the autumn with him. "That season," said she, "is equally beautiful with the spring." With what pleasure did I promise to decline all other engagements for this. Emily retired to her apartment, and, according to custom, I went up to mine, accompanied by my two little boys. They ran gaily up the stairs, and in crossing the range of apartments, but faintly lighted, to my no small surprise, their boisterous mirth was not and in crossing the range of apartments, but faintly lighted, to my no small surprise, their boisterous mirth was not interrupted by the terrible portrait. Okay. For my own part, my head and heart were full of the intended journey, and of the agreeable manner in which my time had passed at the Count's chateau. The images of those happy days crowded on my recollection. My imagination, at that time possessing all the vivacity of youth, was so much agitated that I could not enjoy the sleep which already overpowered my friend. Emily's image, so interesting by her sprightly grace, by her pure affection for me, was present to my mind like an amiable phantom shining in beauty. I placed myself at the window to take another look at the country I had so frequently ranged with her, and traced our steps again, probably for the last time. I remembered each spot illumined by the pale light the moon afforded. The nightingale was singing in the groves where we had delighted to repose. The little river on which, while gaily singing, we often sailed, rolled murmuringly her silver waves. Absorbed in a profound reverie, I mentally exclaimed, "With the flowers of spring, this soft, pure, peaceful affection will probably fade, and as frequently the after seasons blight the blossoms and destroy the promised fruit. So possibly may the approaching autumn envelop in cold reserve that heart which, at the present moment, appears only to expand with mine." Saddened by these reflections, I withdrew from the window, and overcome by a painful agitation, I traversed the adjoining rooms, and on a sudden found myself before the portrait of my friend's ancestor. The moon's beams darted on it in the most singular manner possible, insomuch as to give the appearance of a horrible, moving spectre, and the reflection of the light gave to it the appearance of a real substance about to quit the darkness by which it was surrounded. The inanimation of its features appeared to give place to the most profound melancholy. The sad and glazed look of the eyes appeared the only hindrance to its uttering its grief. My knees tremblingly knocked against each other, and with an unsteady step I regained my chamber. The window still remained open. I reseated myself at it, in order that the freshness of the night air and the aspect of the beautiful surrounding country might dissipate the terror I had experienced. My wandering eyes fixed on a long vista of ancient linden trees, which extended from my window to the ruins of an old tower, which had often been the scene of our pleasures and rural fetes. The remembrance of this hideous portrait had vanished, when on a sudden there appeared to me a thick fog issuing from the ruined tower, which, advancing through the vista of lindens, came towards me. I regarded this cloud with an anxious curiosity. It approached, but again it was concealed by the thickly spreading branches of the trees. On a sudden I perceived, in a spot of the avenue less dark than the rest, the same figure represented in the formidable picture, enveloped in the grey mantle I so well knew. It advanced towards the chateau, as if hesitating. No noise was heard of its footsteps on the pavement. It passed before my window without looking up, and gained a back door which led to the apartments in the colonnade of the chateau. Seized with trembling apprehension, I darted towards my bed and saw with pleasure that the two children were fast asleep on either side. The noise I made awoke them. They started, but in an instant were asleep again. The agitation I had endured took from me the power of sleep, and I turned to awake one of the children to talk with me. But no powers can depict the horrors I endured when I saw the frightful figure at the side of the child's bed. I was petrified with horror, and dared neither move nor shut my eyes. I beheld the spectre stoop towards the child and softly kiss his forehead. He then went round the bed and kissed the forehead of the other boy. I lost all recollection at that moment, and the following morning, when the children awoke me with their caresses, I was willing to consider the whole as a dream. Meanwhile, the moment for our departure was at hand. We once again breakfasted all together in a grove of lilacs and flowers. "I advise you to take a little more care of yourself," said the old count in the midst of other conversation, "for I last night saw you walking rather late in the garden in a dress ill-suited to the damp air, and I was fearful such imprudence would expose you to cold and fever. Young people are apt to fancy they are invulnerable, but I repeat to you, take advice from a friend." "In truth," I answered, "I believe readily that I have been attacked by a violent fever, for never before was I so harassed by terrifying visions. I can now conceive how dreams afford to a heated imagination subjects for the most extraordinary stories of apparitions." "What would you tell me?" demanded the Count in a manner not wholly devoid of agitation. I related to him all that I had seen the preceding night, and to my great surprise, he appeared to me in no way astonished, but extremely affected. "You say," added he in a trembling voice, "that the phantom kissed the two children's foreheads?" I answered him that it was even so. He then exclaimed in accents of the deepest despair, "Oh heavens, they must then both die. No! Dang specters!" Okay. Till now the company had listened without the slightest noise or interruption to Ferdinand, but as he pronounced the last words, the greater part of his audience trembled, and the young lady who had previously occupied the chair on which he sat uttered a piercing shriek. "Imagine," continued Ferdinand, "how astonished my friend must have been at this unexpected exclamation. The vision of the night had caused him excess of agitation, but the melancholy voice of the Count pierced his heart and seemed to annihilate his being by the terrifying conviction of the existence of the spiritual world and the secret horrors with which this idea was accompanied. It was not then a dream, a chimera, the fruit of an overheated imagination, but a mysterious and infallible messenger, which, dispatched from the world of spirits, had passed close to him, had placed itself by his couch, and by its fatal kiss had dropped the germ of death in the bosom of the two children. He vainly entreated the Count to explain this extraordinary event. Equally fruitless were his son's endeavors to obtain from the Count the development of this mystery, which apparently concerned the whole family. "You are as yet too young," replied the Count. "Too soon, alas! For your peace of mind will you be informed of these terrible circumstances which you now think mysterious." Just as they came to announce to my friend that all was ready, he recollected that during the recital the Count had sent away Emily and her two younger brothers. Deeply agitated, he took leave of the Count and the two young children who came towards him, and who would scarcely permit themselves to be separated from him. Emily, who had placed herself at a window, made a sign of adieu. 3 days afterwards, the young Count received news of the death of his two younger brothers. They were both taken off in the same night. "You see," continued Ferdinand in a gayer tone, in order to counteract the impression of sadness and melancholy his story had produced on the company, "you see, my history is very far from affording any natural explication of the wonders it contains, explanations which only tend to shock one's reason. It does not even make you entirely acquainted with the mysterious person, which one has a right to expect in all marvelous recitals. But I could learn nothing more, and the old Count dying without revealing the mystery to his son, I see no other means of terminating the history of the portrait, which is undoubtedly by no means devoid of interest, than by inventing according to one's fancy a denouement which shall explain all." "That does not appear at all necessary to me," said a young man. "This history, like the one that preceded it, is in reality finished, and gives all the satisfaction one has any right to expect from recitals of this species." "I should not agree with you," replied Ferdinand, "if I was capable of explaining the mysterious connection between the portrait and the death of the two children in the same night, or the terror of Juliana at sight of the other portrait, and her death, consequently caused by it. I am, however, not the less obliged to you for the entire satisfaction you evince." "But," resumed the young man, "what benefit would your imagination receive if the connections of which you speak were known to you?" "Very great benefit, without doubt," replied Ferdinand, for imagination requires the completion of the objects it represents, as much as the judgment requires correctness and accuracy in its ideas." The mistress of the house, not being partial to these metaphysical disputes, took part with Ferdinand. "We ladies," said she, "are always curious, therefore don't wonder that we complain when a story has no termination. It appears to me like seeing the last scene of Mozart's Don Juan without having witnessed the preceding ones, and I am sure no one would be the better satisfied, although the last scene should possess infinite merit." The young man remained silent, perhaps less through conviction than politeness. Several persons were preparing to retire, and Ferdinand, who had vainly searched with all his eyes for the young lady with flaxen hair, was already at the door, when an elderly gentleman, whom he remembered to have seen in the music-room, asked him whether the friend concerning whom he had related the story was not called Count Meltheim. "That is his name," answered Ferdinand a little dryly. "How did you guess it? Are you acquainted with his family?" You have advanced nothing but the simple truth," resumed the unknown. "Where is the Count at this moment?" "He is on his travels," replied Ferdinand. "But I am astonished. Do you correspond with him?" demanded the unknown. "I do," answered Ferdinand, "but I don't understand." "Well, then," continued the old man, "tell him that Emily still continues to think of him, and that he must return as speedily as possible, if he takes any interest in a secret that very particularly concerns her family." "What?" On this, the old man stepped into his carriage and had vanished from Ferdinand's sight ere he had recovered from his surprise. He looked around him in vain for someone who might inform him of the name of the unknown. Everyone was gone, and he was on the point of risking being considered indiscreet by asking for information of the pastor who had so courteously treated him, when they fastened the door of the house, and he was compelled to return in sadness to his inn and leave his researches till the morning. The frightful scenes of the night preceding Ferdinand's departure from the chateau of his friend's father had tended to weaken the remembrance of Emily, and the distraction which his journey so immediately after had produced had not contributed to recall it with any force. But all at once the recollection of Emily darted across his mind with fresh vigor, aided by the recital of the previous evening and the old man's conversation. It presented itself even with greater vivacity and strength than at the period of its birth. Ferdinand now fancied that he could trace Emily in the pretty girl with flaxen hair. The more he reflected on her figure, her eyes, the sound of her voice, the grace with which she moved, the more striking the resemblance appeared to him. The piercing shriek that had escaped her when he mentioned the old count's explication of the phantom's appearance, her sudden disappearance at the termination of the recital, her connection with Ferdinand's family, for the young lady, in her history of Juliana, had recounted the fatal accident which actually befell Ferdinand's sister, all gave a degree of certainty to his suppositions. He passed the night in forming projects and plans, in resolving doubts and difficulties, and Ferdinand impatiently waited for the day which was to enlighten him. He went to the pastors, whom he found in the midst of his choirs of music, and by giving a natural turn to the conversation, he seized the opportunity of inquiring concerning the persons with whom he had passed the preceding evening. He unfortunately, however, could not get satisfactory answers to his questions concerning the young lady with flaxen hair and the mysterious old gentleman, for the pastor had been so absorbed in his music that he had not paid attention to many persons who had visited him, and though Ferdinand in the most minute manner possible described their dress and other particulars, it was impossible to make the pastor comprehend the individuals whose names he was so anxious to learn. "It is unfortunate," said the pastor, "that my wife should be out. She would have given you all the information you desire. But according to your description, it strikes me the young person with flaxen hair must be Mademoiselle de Hainthal." "But Mademoiselle de Hainthal," reiterated Ferdinand somewhat abruptly. "I think so," replied the clergyman. "Are you acquainted with the young lady?" "I know her family," answered Ferdinand, "but from her features bearing so strong a resemblance to the family, I thought it might have been the young Countess of Wartburg, who was so much like her brother." "That is very possible," said the pastor. "You knew, then, the unfortunate Count Wartburg?" "Unfortunate!" exclaimed Ferdinand, greatly surprised. You don't then know anything," continued the pastor, "of the deplorable event that has recently taken place at the chateau of Wartburg. The young count, who had probably in his travels seen some beautifully laid-out gardens, was anxious to embellish the lovely country which surrounds his chateau, and as the ruins of an old tower seemed to be an obstacle to his plans, he ordered them to be pulled down. His gardener in vain represented to him that seen from one of the wings of the chateau they presented, at the termination of a majestic and ancient avenue of linden trees, a magnificent coup d'oeil, and that, or coup d'oeil, I'm not sure, I'm sorry, and that they would also give a more romantic appearance to the new parts they were about to form. An old servant, grown gray in the service of his forefathers, supplicated him with tears in his eyes to spare the venerable remains of past ages. They even told him of an ancient tradition, preserved in the neighborhood, which declared that the existence of the house of Wartburg was by supernatural means linked with the preservation of that tower. The count, who was a well-informed man, paid no attention to these sayings. Indeed, they possibly made him the more firmly adhere to his resolution. The workmen were put to their task. The walls, which were constructed of huge masses of rock, for a long while resisted the united efforts of tools and gunpowder. The architect of this place appeared to have built it for eternity. At length, perseverance and labor brought it down. A piece of the rock separating from the rest precipitated itself into an opening which had been concealed for ages by rubbish and loose sticks, and fell into a deep cavern. An immense subterranean vault was discovered by the rays of the setting sun, supported by enormous pillars. But ere they proceeded in their researches, they went to inform the young count of the discovery they had made. He came, and being curious to see this dark abode, descended into it with 2 servants. The first thing that they discovered were chains covered with rust, which, being fixed in the rock, plainly shewed the use formerly made of the cavern. On another side was a corpse, dressed in female attire of centuries past, which had surprisingly resisted the ravages of time. Close to it was extended a human skeleton, almost destroyed. The two servants related that the young count, on seeing the body, cried in an accent of extreme horror, "Great God, it is she, then, whose portrait killed my intended wife." Saying which, he fell senseless by the body. The shake which his fall occasioned reduced the skeleton to dust. They bore the count to his chateau, where the care of the physicians restored him to life, but he did not recover his senses. It is probable that this tragical event was caused by the confined and unwholesome air of the cavern. Oh my God, a very few days after, the Count died in a state of total derangement. It is singular enough that the termination of his life should coincide with the destruction of the ruined tower, and there no longer exists any male branch of that family. The deeds relative to the succession, ratified and sealed by the Emperor Otho, are still amongst the archives of his house. Their contents have as yet only been transmitted verbally from father to son as an hereditary secret, which will now, however, be made known. It is also true that the affianced bride of the Count was killed by the portraits falling on her. I yesterday heard that fatal history recited by the lady with flaxen hair, replied Ferdinand. It is very possible that young person is the Countess Emily, replied the pastor, for she was the bosom friend of the unfortunate bride. Does not then the Countess Emily live at the castle of Wartburg? Asked Ferdinand. Since her brother's death, answered the clergyman, she has lived with a relation of her mother's at the chateau of Liebenfeld, a short distance from hence. For as they yet know not with certainty to whom the castle of Wartburg will belong, she prudently lives retired. Ferdinand had learned sufficient to make him abandon the projected journey to the capital. He thanked the pastor for the instructions he had given him, and was conducted to the chateau where Emily now resided. It was still broad day when he arrived. The whole journey he was thinking of the amiable figure which he had recognized too late the preceding evening. He recalled to his idea her every word, the sound of her voice, her actions, and what his memory failed to represent, his imagination depicted with all the vivacity of youth and all the fire of rekindled affection. He already addressed secret reproaches to Emily for not recognizing him, as if he had himself remembered her, and in order to ascertain whether his features were entirely effaced from the recollection of her whom he adored, he caused himself to be announced as a stranger, who was anxious to see her on family matters. While waiting impatiently in the room into which they had conducted him, he discovered among the portraits with which it was decorated that of the young lady whose features had the overnight charmed him anew. He was contemplating it with rapture when the door opened and Emily entered. She instantly recognized Ferdinand, and in the sweetest accents accosted him as the friend of her youth. Surprise rendered Ferdinand incapable of answering suitably to so gracious a reception. It was not the charming person with flaxen hair. It was not a figure corresponding with his imagination, which at this moment presented itself to his view. But it was Emily, shining in every possible beauty, far beyond what Ferdinand had expected. He recollected notwithstanding each feature which had already charmed him, but now clothed in every perfection which nature bestows on her most favored objects. Ferdinand was lost in thought for some moments. He dared not make mention of his love, and still less did he dare speak of the portrait and the other wonders of the castle of Wartburg. Emily spoke only of the happiness she had experienced in her earlier days, and slightly mentioned her brother's death. As the evening advanced, the young female with flaxen hair came in with the old stranger. Emily presented them both to Ferdinand as the Baron of Hainthal and his daughter Clotilde. So Clotilde is who he was supposed to marry, but he didn't know her, so he was going to see her. Interesting. Okay. Emily presented them both to Ferdinand as the Baron of Hainthal and his daughter Clotilde. They remembered instantly the stranger whom they had seen the preceding evening. Clotilde rallied him on his wish to be incognito, and he found himself on a sudden, by a short train of natural events, in the company of the person whom his mother intended for his wife, the object of his affection whom he had just discovered, and the interesting stranger who had promised him an explanation relative to the mysterious portraits. Okay, all right, we're getting into it even more. Come on, all right. Their society was soon augmented by the mistress of the chateau, in whom Ferdinand recognized one of those who sat by his side the preceding evening. In consideration for Emily, they omitted all the subjects most interesting to Ferdinand, but after supper the Baron drew nearer to him. "I doubt not," said he to him, "that you are anxious to have some light thrown on events, of which, according to your recital last night, you were a spectator. I knew you from the first, and I knew also that the story you related as of a friend was your own history. I cannot, however, inform you of more than I know, but that will perhaps be sufficient to save Emily, for whom I feel the affection of a daughter, from chagrin and uneasiness. And from your recital of last evening, I perceive you take a lively interest concerning her." "Preserve Emily from uneasiness," replied Ferdinand with warmth. "Explain yourself. What is there I ought to do?" "We cannot," answered the Baron, "converse here with propriety. Tomorrow morning I will come and see you in your apartment." Ferdinand asked him for an audience that night, but the Baron was inflexible. "It is not my wish," said he, "to work upon your imagination by any marvelous recital, but to converse with you on the very important concerns of two distinguished families, for which reason I think the freshness of morning will be better suited to lessen the horror that my recital must cause you. Therefore, if not inconvenient to you, I wish you to attend me at an early hour in the morning. I am fond of rising with the sun, and yet I have never found the time till midday too long for arranging my affairs," added he, smiling, and turning half round towards the rest of the party, as if speaking on indifferent topics. Ferdinand passed a night of agitation, thinking of the conference he was to have with the Baron, who was at his window at dawn of day. "You know," said the Baron, "that I married the old Count of Wartburg's sister, which alliance was less the cause than the consequence of our intimate friendship. We reciprocally communicated our most secret thoughts, and the one never undertook anything without the other taking an equal interest with himself in his projects. The Count had, however, one secret from me, of which I should never have come at the knowledge but for an accident." On a sudden, a report was spread abroad that the phantom of the Nun's Rock had been seen, which was the name given by the peasantry to the old ruined tower which you knew. Persons of sense only laughed at the report. I was anxious the following night to unmask this spectre, and I already anticipated my triumph. But to my no small surprise, the Count endeavored to dissuade me from the attempt, and the more I persisted, the more serious his arguments became, and at length he conjured me in the name of friendship to relinquish the design. His gravity of manner excited my attention. I asked him several questions. I even regarded his fears in the light of disease, and urged him to take suitable remedies. And urged him to take suitable remedies. But he answered me with an air of chagrin. "Brother, you know my sincerity towards you, but this is a secret sacred to my family. My son can alone be informed of it, and that only on my deathbed. Therefore, ask me no more questions." I held my peace, but I secretly collected all the traditions known amongst the peasantry. The most generally believed one was, that the phantom of the Nun's Rock was seen when any one of the Count's family were about to die, and in effect, in a few days after, the Count's youngest son expired. Yo! We're reading ghost stories, yes, and it's insane. It started with telling ghost stories, and then all the ghost stories are real, and they're all connected, and it's two families, and everybody's dying, or has died. So that's where we're at. We're learning things, though. So, yeah. So yes, a few days after the Count's youngest son expired. The Count seemed to apprehend it. He gave the strictest possible charge to the nurse to take care of him, and under pretext of feeling indisposed himself, sent for 2 physicians to the castle. But these extreme precautions were precisely the cause of the child's death, for the nurse, passing over the stones near the ruins, in her extreme care, took the child in her arms to carry him, and her foot slipping, she fell, and in her fall wounded the child so much that he expired on the spot. Oh my god. Brain, wait, sounds wicked. It is, it's insane. Brain is buggered. Well, I hope that, well, this probably won't help, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. So yeah, there's been a lot of trying to avoid fate and that causing it. So the whole whatever it's called. I can't remember what it's called. Uh the complex. I can't remember what it's called. Destiny, but the other thing, the actual character from which this comes, sort of thing, where he tried to avoid his fate, but then I can't remember. I'll try to remember. But yeah. Um She said she fancied that she saw the child extended, bleeding in the midst of the stones, that her fright had made her fall with her face on the earth, and that when she came to herself, the child was absolutely lying weltering in his blood, precisely on the same spot where she had seen his ghost. I will not tire you with a relation of all the sayings uttered by an illiterate woman to explain the cause of the vision, for under similar accidents, invention far outstrips reality. I could not expect to gain much more satisfactory information from the family records, for the principal documents were preserved in an iron chest, the key of which was never out of the possession of the owner of the castle. I, however, discovered by the genealogical register and other similar papers that this family had never had collateral male branches, but further than this, my researches could not discover. Ah, yes, bleeding children, you arrived at the right moment to come and relax. Exactly. Oh no, it's been yeah, I guess that probably was the most morbid so far, apart from the idea of it. So yes, relaxing. Enjoy. At length, on my friend's deathbed, I obtained some information which, however, was far from being satisfactory. You remember that while the son was on his travels, the father was attacked by the complaint which carried him off so suddenly. The evening previous to his decease, he sent for me express, dismissed all those who were with him, and turning towards me, said, I am aware that my end is fast approaching, and am the first of my family that has been carried off without communicating to his son the secret on which the safety of our house depends. Swear to me to reveal it only to my son, and I shall die contented. In the names of friendship and honor, I promised what he exacted of me, and he thus began. The origin of my race, as you know, is not to be traced. Ditmar, the first of my ancestry mentioned in the written records, accompanied the Emperor Otho to Italy. His history is also very obscure. He had an enemy called Count Bruno, whose only son he killed in revenge, according to ancient tradition, and then kept the father confined till his death in that tower, whose ruins, situated in the Nun's Rock, still defy the hand of time. That portrait, which hangs alone in the state chamber, is Ditmar's, and if the traditions of the family are to be believed, it was painted by the dead. In fact, it is almost impossible to believe that any human being could have contemplated sufficiently long to paint the portrait, the outline of features so hideous. My forefathers have frequently tried to plaster over this redoubtable figure, but in the night the colors came through the plaster and reappeared as distinctly as before. And often in the night, this Ditmar has been seen wandering abroad, dressed in the garb represented in the picture, and by kissing the descendants of the family, has doomed them to death. 3 of my children have received this fatal kiss. It is said a monk imposed on him this penance in expiation of his crimes, but he cannot destroy all the children of his race, for so long as the ruins of the old tower shall remain, and whilst one stone shall remain on another, so long shall the Count de Wartburg's family exist, and so long shall the spirit of Ditmar wander on earth, and devote to death the branches of his house, without being able to annihilate the trunk. His race will never be extinct, and his punishment will only cease when the ruins of the tower are entirely dispersed. He brought up, with a truly paternal care, the daughter of his enemy, and wedded her to a rich and powerful knight. But notwithstanding this, the monk never remitted his penance. Ditmar, however, foreseeing that one day or other his race would perish, was certainly anxious ere then to prepare for an event on which his deliverance depended, and accordingly made a relative disposition of his hereditary property, in case of his family becoming extinct. The act which contained his will was ratified by the Emperor Otho. As yet it has not been opened, and nobody knows its contents. It is kept in the secret archives of our house. I have a thought, but I'll leave it for now. The speaking thus much was a great effort to my friend. He required a little rest, but was shortly after incapable of articulating a single word. I performed the commission with which he charged me to his son. And he did, notwithstanding, replied Ferdinand. Even so, answered the Baron, but judge more favorably of your excellent friend. I have of 10 seen him alone in the great state chamber, with his eyes fixed on this horrible portrait. He would then go into the other rooms, where the portraits of his ancestors were ranged for several successive generations, and after contemplating them with visible internal emotion, would return to that of the founder of his house. Broken sentences and frequent soliloquies, which I overheard by accident, did not leave me a shadow of doubt, but that he was the first of his race who had magnanimity of soul sufficient to resolve on liberating the spirit of Dittmar from its penance, and of sacrificing himself to release his house from the malediction that hung over it. Possibly he was strengthened in his resolutions by the grief he experienced for the death of his dearly beloved. "Oh," cried Ferdinand, deeply affected, "how like my friend!" He had, however, in the ardor of his enthusiasm, forgotten to guard his sister's sensibility, said the Baron. "How so?" demanded Ferdinand. "It is in consequence of this," answered the Baron, "that I now address myself to you and reveal to you the secret. I have told you that Dittmar demonstrated a paternal affection to the daughter of his enemy, had given her a handsome portion, and had married her to a valiant knight. Learn then that this knight was Adalbert de Meltheim, from whom the counts of this name descended in a direct line." "Is it possible?" exclaimed Ferdinand. "The author of my race?" "The same," answered the Baron. "And according to appearances, Dittmar designed that the family of Meltheim should succeed him on the extinction of his own. Haste, then, in order to establish your probable right to the—" "Never," said Ferdinand. "So long as Emily—" "This is no more than I expected from you," replied the Baron. "But remember that in Dittmar's time the girls were not thought of in deeds of this kind. Your inconsiderate generosity would be prejudicial to Emily, for the next of kin who lay claim to the fief do not probably possess very gallant ideas. As a relation, though only on the female side, I have taken the necessary measures, and I think it right you should be present at the castle of Wartburg when the seals are broken, that you may be immediately recognized as the only immediate descendant of Adalbert, and that you may take instant possession of the inheritance." "And Emily?" demanded Ferdinand. "As for what is to be done for her," replied the Baron, "I leave to you, and feel certain of her being provided for suitably, since her destiny will be in the hands of a man whose birth equals her own, who knows how to appreciate the rank in which she is placed, and who will evince his claims to merit and esteem." "Have I a right, then," said Ferdinand, "to flatter myself with the hope that Emily will permit me to surrender her the property to which she is actually entitled?" "Consult Emily on the subject," said the Baron, and here finished the conference. Ferdinand, delighted, ran to Emily. She answered with the same frankness he had manifested, and they were neither of them slow to confess their mutual passion. Several days passed in this amiable delirium. The inhabitants of the chateau participated in the joy of the young lovers, and Ferdinand at length wrote to his mother to announce the choice he had made. They were occupied in preparations for removing to the castle of Wartburg when a letter arrived which at once destroyed Ferdinand's happiness. His mother refused to consent to his marriage with Emily. Her husband having, she said, on his deathbed, insisted on his wedding the Baron of Hainthal's daughter, and that she should refuse her consent to any other marriage. He had discovered a family secret, which forced him peremptorily to press this point, on which depended his son's welfare and the happiness of his family. She had given her promise, and was obliged to maintain it, although much afflicted at being compelled to act contrary to her son's inclinations. Is this a horror story or a love story? Both? Question mark? It's confusing. It's insane. Hi, how's it going? Spoopins! So excited. Yeah. It's so twisty. I don't know where it's going. In vain did Ferdinand conjure his mother to change her determination. He declared to her that he would be the last of his race rather than renounce Emily. She was not displeased with his entreaties, but remained inflexible. Oh no. I have another thought. The Baron plainly perceived from Ferdinand's uneasiness and agitation that his happiness had fled, and as he possessed his entire confidence, he soon became acquainted with the cause of his grief. He wrote in consequence to the Countess Meltime, and expressed his astonishment at the singular disposition the Count had made on his deathbed. But all he could obtain from her was a promise to come to the castle of Wartburg to see the female whom she destined for her son, and the one whom he had himself chosen, and probably to elucidate by her arrival so singular and complicated an affair. Spring was beginning to enliven all nature when Ferdinand, accompanied by Emily, the Baron, and his daughter, arrived at the castle of Wartburg. The preparations which the principal cause of their journey required occupied some days. Ferdinand and Emily consoled themselves in the hope that the Countess of Meltime's presence would remove every obstacle which opposed their love, and that at sight of the two lovers she would overcome her scruples. A few days afterwards she arrived, embraced Emily in the most affectionate manner, and called her dear daughter, at the same time expressing her great regret that she could not really consider her such, being obliged to fulfill a promise made to her dying husband. The Baron at length persuaded her to reveal the motive for this singular determination, and after deliberating a short time, she thus expressed herself. The secret you are anxious I should reveal to you concerns your family, Monsieur le Baron. Consequently, if you release me from the necessity of longer silence, I am very willing to abandon my scruples. A fatal picture has, you know, robbed me of my daughter, and my husband, after this melancholy accident, determined on entirely removing this unfortunate portrait. He accordingly gave orders for it to be put in a heap of old furniture, where no one would think of looking for it, and in order to discover the best place to conceal it, he was present when it was taken there. In the removal, he perceived a piece of parchment behind the canvas, which the fall had a little damaged. Having removed it, he discovered it to be an old document of a singular nature. The original of this portrait, said the deed, was called Bertha de Hainthal. She fixes her looks on her female descendants, in order that if any one of them should receive its death by this portrait, it may prove an expiatory sacrifice which will reconcile her to God. She will then see the families of Hainthal and Meltime united by the bonds of love, and finding herself released, she will have cause to rejoice in the birth of her after-born descendants. Good Lord, okay. Okay, we're gonna leave it. This, then, is the motive which made my husband anxious to fulfill, by the projected marriage, the vows of Bertha, for the death of his daughter, caused by Bertha, had rendered her very name formidable to him. You see, therefore, I have the same reasons for adhering to the promise made by my dying husband. Oh, what? All right. Did not the Count, demanded the Baron, allege any more positive reason for this command? Nothing more, most assuredly, replied the Countess. Well then, answered the Baron, in case the writing of which you speak should admit of an explanation wholly differing from, but equally clear with, the one attached thereto by the deceased, would you sooner follow the sense than the letter of the writing? There is no doubt on that subject, answered the Countess, for no one is more anxious than myself to see that unfortunate promise set aside. Know then, said the Baron, that the corpse of that Bertha, who occasioned the death of your daughter, reposes here at Wartburg, and that, on this subject, as well as all the other mysteries of the castle, we shall have our doubts satisfied. The Baron would not at this time explain himself further, but said to the Countess that the documents contained in the archives of the castle would afford the necessary information, and recommended that Ferdinand should, with all possible dispatch, hasten everything relative to the succession. Conformable to the Baron's wish, it was requisite that, previous to any other research, the secret deeds contained in the archives should be opened. the law commissioners and the next of kin who were present, who most likely promised themselves an ample compensation for their curiosity in the contents of the other parts of the records, were anxious to raise objections. But the Baron represented to them that the secrets of the family appertained to the unknown heir alone, and that consequently no one had a right to become acquainted with them, unless permitted by him. These reasons produced the proper effect. They followed the Baron into the... My phone went off, sorry. These reasons produced the proper effect. They followed the Baron into the immense vault in which were deposited the family records. They therein discovered an iron chest, which had not been opened for nearly 1,000 years. A massive chain, which several times wound round it, was strongly fixed to the floor and to the wall, but the Emperor's grand seal was a greater security for this sacred deposit than all the chains and bolts which guarded it. It was instantly recognized and removed. The strong bolts yielded, and from the chest was taken the old parchment which had resisted the effects of time. This piece contained, as the Baron expected, the disposition which confirmed the right of inheritance to the House of Meltheim in case of the extinction of the House of Wartburg, and Ferdinand, according to the Baron's advice, having in readiness the deeds justifying and acknowledging him as the lawful heir to the House of Meltheim, the next of kin with regret permitted what they could not oppose, and he took possession of the inheritance. The Baron having made him a signal, he immediately sealed the chest with his seal. He afterwards entertained the strangers in a splendid manner, and at night found himself in possession of his castle with only his mother, Emily, the Baron, and his daughter. It will be but just, said the Baron, to devote this night, which introduces a new name into this castle, to the memory of those who have hitherto possessed it, and we shall acquit ourselves most suitably in this duty, by reading in the council chamber the documents which, without doubt, are destined to explain, as supplementary deeds, the will of Dittmar. This arrangement was instantly adopted. The hearts of Emily and Ferdinand were divided between hope and fear, for they impatiently, yet doubtingly, awaited the denouement of Bertha's history, which after so many successive generations had in so incomprehensible a manner interfered with their attachment. The chamber was lighted. Ferdinand opened the iron case, and the Baron examined the old parchments. "This," cried he, after having searched some short time, "will inform us." So saying, he drew from the chest some sheets of parchment. On the one which enveloped the rest was the portrait of a knight of an agreeable figure, and habited in the costume of the 10th century, and the inscription at the bottom called him Dittmar, but they could scarcely discover the slightest resemblance in it to the frightful portrait in the state chamber. The Baron offered to translate, in reading to them the document written in Latin, provided they would make allowances for the errors which were likely to arise from so hasty a translation. That doesn't sound good. The curiosity of his auditors was so greatly excited that they readily consented, and he then read as follows: "I, the undersigned Tutelon, monk of St. Gall, have, with the Lord Dittmar's consent, written the following narrative. I have omitted nothing, nor written aught of my own accord. Being sent for to Metz, to carve in stone the image of the Virgin Mary, and that mother of our blessed Saviour, having opened my eyes and directed my hands, so that I could contemplate her celestial countenance, and represented on stone to be worshipped by true believers, the Lord Dittmar discovered me, and engaged me to follow him to his castle, in order that I might execute his portrait for his descendants. I began painting it in the state chamber of his castle, and on returning the following day to resume my task, I found that a strange hand had been at work, and had given to the portrait quite a different countenance, which was horrible to look at, for it resembled one who had risen from the dead. I trembled with terror, however, I effaced these hideous features, and I painted anew the Count Dittmar's figure, according to my recollection. But the following day I again discovered the nocturnal labor of the stranger hand. I was seized with still greater fear, but resolved to watch during the night, and I recommenced painting the knight's figure, such as it really was. At midnight I took a torch, and advancing softly into the chamber to examine the portrait, I perceived a spectre, resembling the skeleton of a child. It held a pencil, and was endeavoring to give Dittmar's image the hideous features of death. On my entering, the spectre slowly turned its head towards me, that I might see its frightful visage. My terror became extreme. I advanced no further, but retired to my room, where I remained in prayer till morning, for I was unwilling to interrupt the work executed in the dead of night. In the morning, discovering the same strange features in Ditmar's portrait as that of the 2 preceding mornings, I did not again risk effacing the work of the nightly painter, but went in search of the knight, and related to him what I had seen. I shewed him the picture. He trembled with horror, and confessed his crimes to me, for which he required absolution. Having for 3 successive days invoked all the saints to my assistance, I imposed on him as a penance for the murder of his enemy, which he had avowed to me, to submit to the most rigid mortifications in a dungeon during the rest of his life. But I told him that as he had murdered an innocent child, his spirit would never be at rest till it had witnessed the extermination of his race, for the Almighty would punish the death of that child by the death of the children of Ditmar, who, with the exception of one in each generation, would all be carried off in early life. And as for him, his spirit would wander during the night, resembling the portrait painted by the hand of the skeleton child, and that he would condemn to death, by a kiss, the children who were the sacrifices to his crimes, in the same manner as he had given one to his enemy's child before he killed it. And that, in fine, his race should not become extinct, so long as stone remained on stone in the tower where he had permitted his enemy to die of hunger. I then gave him absolution. He immediately made over his seigniory to his son, and married the daughter of his enemy, who had been brought up by him, to the brave knight Sir Adalbert. He bequeathed all his property, in case of his race becoming extinct, to this knight's descendants, and caused this will to be ratified by the Emperor Otho. After having done so, he retired to a cave near the tower, where his corpse is interred, for he died like a pious recluse, and expiated his crimes by extreme penance. As soon as he was laid in his coffin, he resembled the portrait in the state chamber, but during his life he was like the portrait depicted on this parchment, which I was able to paint without interruption, after having given him absolution, and by his command I have written and signed this document since his death. And I deposit it, with the emperor's letters patent, in an iron chest, which I have caused to be sealed. I pray God speedily to deliver his soul, and to cause his body to rise from the dead to everlasting felicity. He is delivered, cried Emily, greatly affected, and his image will no longer spread terror around. But I confess that the sight of that figure, and even that of the frightful portrait itself, would never have led me to dream of such horrible crimes as the monk Tudelon relates. Certain I am, his enemy must have mortally wounded his happiness, or he undoubtedly would have been incapable of committing such frightful crimes. Possibly, said the Baron, continuing his researches, we shall discover some explanation on that point. There's always more. It's like peeling an onion. We must also find some respecting Bertha, replied Ferdinand in a low tone, and casting a timid look on Emily and his mother. This night, answered the Baron, is consecrated to the memory of the dead. Let us therefore forget our own concerns, since those of the past call our attention. Assuredly, exclaimed Emily, the unfortunate person who secured these sheets in the chest ardently looked forward to the hope of their coming to light. Let us therefore delay it no longer. The Baron, after having examined several, read aloud these words: The Confession of Ditmar, and he continued thus: Peace and health. When this sheet is drawn from the obscurity in which it is now buried, my soul will, I hope firmly in God and the saints, be at eternal rest and peace. But for your good I have ordered to be committed to paper the cause of my chastisement, in order that you may learn that vengeance belongs to God alone, and not to men. For the most just amongst them, knows not how to judge. And again, that you may not in your heart condemn me, but rather that you may pity me. For my misery has nearly equaled my crimes, and my spirit would never have dreamt of evil, if man had not rent my heart. How justly, exclaimed Ferdinand, has Emily's good sense divined thus much. The Baron continued, My name is Ditmar. They surnamed me the Rich, though I was then only a poor knight, and my only possession was a very small castle. When the Emperor Otho departed for Italy, whither he was called by the beautiful Adelaide to receive her hand, I followed him, and I gained the affection of the most charming woman in Pavia, whom I conducted as my intended spouse to the castle of my forefathers. Already the day appointed for the celebration of my nuptials was at hand. The emperor sent for me. His favorite, the Count Bruno de Hainthal, had seen Bertha. Bertha! Exclaimed everyone present. But the baron, without permitting them to interrupt him, continued his translation. One day, when the emperor had promised to grant him any recompense that he thought his services merited, he asked of him my intended bride. No! Otho was mute with astonishment, but his imperial word was given. I presented myself before the emperor, who offered me riches, lands, honors, if I would but consent to yield Bertha to the count. But she was dearer to me than every worldly good. The emperor yielded to a torrent of anger. He carried off my intended bride by force, ordered my castle to be pulled down, and caused me to be thrown into prison. I cursed his power and my destiny. The amiable figure of Bertha, however, appeared to me in a dream, and I consoled myself during the day by the sweet illusions of the night. At length my keeper said to me, I pity you, Ditmar. You suffer in a prison for your fidelity, while Bertha abandons you. Tomorrow she weds the count. Accede then to the emperor's wish, ere it be too late, and ask of him what you think fit, as a recompense for the loss of the faithless fair. These words froze my heart. The following night, instead of the gracious image of Bertha, the frightful spirit of vengeance presented itself to me. The following morning, I said to my keeper, Go and tell the emperor I yield Bertha to his Bruno, but as a recompense, I demand this tower, and as much land as will be requisite to build me a new castle. The emperor was satisfied, for he frequently repented his violent passions, but he could not alter what he had already decided. He therefore gave me the tower in which I had been confined, and all the lands around it for the space of 4 leagues. He also gave me more gold and silver than was sufficient to build a castle much more magnificent than the one he had caused to be pulled down. I took unto myself a wife in order to perpetuate my race, but Bertha still reigned sole mistress of my heart. I also built myself a castle, from which I made a communication by subterranean and secret passages with my former prison, the Tower, and with the castle of Bruno, the residence of my mortal enemy. As soon as the edifice was completed, I entered the fortress by the secret passage and appeared as the spirit of one of his ancestors before the bed of his son, the heir with which Bertha had presented him. The women who lay beside him were seized with fear. I leaned over the child, who was the precise image of its mother, and kissed its forehead. But it was the kiss of death. It carried with it a secret poison. Bruno and Bertha acknowledged the vengeance of heaven. They received it as a punishment for the wrongs they had occasioned me, and they devoted their first child to the service of God. As it was a girl, I spared it, but Bertha had no more children, and Bruno, irritated to find his race so nearly annihilated, repudiated his wife, as if he repented the injustice of which he had been guilty in taking her, and married another. The unfortunate Bertha took refuge in a monastery, and consecrated herself to heaven, but her reason fled, and one night she quitted her retreat, came to the tower in which I had been confined, in consequence of her perfidy, there bewailed her crime, and there grief terminated her existence, which circumstance gave rise to that tower being called the Nun's Rock. I heard during the night her sobs, and on going to the tower found Bertha extended motionless. The dews of night had seized her. She was dead. I then resolved to avenge her loss. I placed her corpse in a deep vault beneath the tower, and having by means of my subterranean passage discovered all the Count's movements, I attacked him when unguarded, and dragging him to the vault which contained his wife's corpse, I there abandoned him. The emperor, irritated against him for having divorced Bertha, gave me all his possessions as a remuneration for the injustice I had heretofore experienced. I caused all the subterranean passages to be closed. I took under my care his daughter Hildegard, and brought her up as my child. She loved the Count Adalbert de Meltheim, but one night her mother's ghost appeared to her, and reminded her that she was consecrated to the Almighty. This vision, however, could not deter her from marrying Adalbert. The night of her marriage, the phantom appeared again before her bed and thus addressed her. Since you have infringed the vow I made, my spirit can never be at rest till one of your female descendants receives its death from me. This discourse occasioned me to send for the venerable Tutelon, monk of St. Gall, who was very celebrated, in order that he might paint a portrait of Bertha, as she had painted herself in the monastery during her insanity, and I gave it to her daughter. Tutelon concealed behind that portrait a writing on parchment, the contents of which were as follows. I am Bertha, and I look at my daughters to see whether one of them will not die for me in expiation of my crimes, and thus reconcile me to God. Then shall I see the two families of Meltheim and Hainthal reunited by love, and in the birth of their descendants I shall enjoy happiness. This, then, exclaimed Ferdinand, is the fatal writing that is to separate me from Emily, but which in fact only unites me to her more firmly. And Bertha, delivered from her penance, blesses the alliance, for by my marriage with Emily, the descendants of Bertha and Dittmar will be reunited. Hello, how's it going? We're reading spooky stories, and we just learned a bunch of stuff, and now we'll just see. I feel like there's still more stuff to come. There's got to be more death. I'm pretty sure there's going to be more death in this. So yes, it's called The Family Portraits. Do you think, demanded the Baron of the Countess, that this explanation can admit of the slightest doubt? Pretty good, sounds awesome. Inspired Frankenstein, yes, exactly. Well, okay, so it was translated from German into French as Fantasmagoriana, which only took some of the German stories, and then it was translated into English, and it only took some of those stories. So yeah. Yeah! So, I figured that would be a good spoopy sort of thing. So, it's been good so far. It's been twisty as stuff. It's been very twisty. And it's still not over, so yeah, I'm curious. The only answer the Countess made was by embracing Emily and placing her hand in that of her son. The joy was universal. Clotilde in particular had an air of extreme delight, and her father several times, in a jocular manner, scolded her for expressing her joy so vehemently. The following morning, they removed the seals from the state chamber in order to contemplate the horrible portrait with somewhat less of sadness than heretofore. But they found that it had faded in a singular manner, and the colors which formerly appeared so harsh had blended and become softened. Shortly after arrived the young man who was anxious to enter into an argument with Ferdinand on the explication of the mysteries relative to the portraits. Clotilde did not conceal that he was far from indifferent to her, and they discovered the joy she had evinced in discovering the favorable turn Emily's attachment had taken was not altogether disinterested, but occasioned by the prospect it afforded of happiness to herself. You feel like someone's going to get a good kiss in a bad place, or bad kiss in a good place, maybe? Well, hang on. Good Lord. It did have to do with kisses, but it was the kiss of death. So we're going to go with that because it's spoopy. Good Lord. Her father, in fact, would never have approved her choice had not the Countess Meltheim removed all pretensions to Clotilde. But, asked Ferdinand of Clotilde's intended, do you not forgive our having searched into certain mysteries which concerned us? Oh, it's almost done. Completely, he answered, but not less disinterestedly than formerly, when I maintained a contrary opinion. I ought now to confess to you that I was present at the fatal accident which caused your sister's death, and that I then discovered the writing concealed behind the portrait. I naturally explained it as your father did afterwards, but I held my peace, for the consequences have brought to light what the discovery of that writing had caused me to apprehend for my love. Am I making money recording audiobooks? No. No. Unsatisfactory explanations are bad, replied Ferdinand, laughing. The happy issue of these discoveries spread universal joy amongst the inhabitants of the castle, which was in some degree heightened by the beauty of the season. The lovers were anxious to celebrate their marriage ere the fall of the leaf, and when next the primrose's return announced the approach of spring, Emily gave birth to a charming boy. Ferdinand's mother, Clotilde, and her husband, and all the friends of the family, among whom were the pastor who was so fond of music, and his pretty little wife, assembled at the fete given in honor of the christening. When the priest who was performing the ceremony asked what name he was to give the child, that of Dittmar was uttered by every mouth, as if they had previously agreed on it. The christening over, Ferdinand, elate with joy, accompanied by his relations and guests, carried his son to the state chamber, before his forefather's portrait. But it was no longer perceptible. The colors, figure, all had disappeared. Not the slightest trace remained. Oh! It was a happy spoopy story. Oh, that was nice. Oh, well, yeah. That's the family portraits. That was awesome. I enjoyed that. Oh. Okay. Well, I need to figure out. Do we want to do one more? Let me see how long the next one is. Cause was this one? Oh, because was this one? Did it come straight from 63 or from like 1? So it was. So it was pretty much 60 pages. We'll see how long the next one is. Think I kind of want to read one more because I think there's 6. Happy and spoopy don't normally go together. No, they don't. But I do. I liked the intermixture of it. That was good. I liked it a lot. That was insane. It was all sorts of twisty, and it was subtle too. So that was like 93. I think we're good. Yeah, we'll be able to read this one because I think it's half the length. But yeah, so like it did it was so twisty, and then it was the way that it started out. It was just it was this guy has to marry this girl, and he doesn't want to marry this girl, so he's gonna go see her to like actually have better arguments against just that my mom wants me to marry her. And then just like just dominoes and cards falling. And when was this particular book published that this photocopy is up? So it says 1800. 1800 or 1812ish. 1813. Yeah, it said 1800 there, but 1813. Originally published in 1813. I guess I was incorrect. I'm sorry. I knew it was one of the two, and I guessed the wrong one. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't highlight in it because it's straight up PDF. But that was the only version that worked with this software that I have. So yeah, but it was so good, and it was just the writing is just amazing, and it wasn't too I don't know how to put it. Like sometimes like older stories are a little bit difficult to follow. But yeah, that one was pretty slick, pretty easy. And then what was the other thing? I was expecting that one of the girls was going to have to die in order for like the thing to be fulfilled. But then it was happy. It was lovely. And that yeah, I kind of liked that. I was expecting I was so used to like having read Poe, although that was like almost a year ago, I think. And then like the last Shakespeare sonnets that we read were just not happy, but just yeah, strange. You think the oldest book you physically have had was 1820 or something? Oh, excellent. What one was that? I don't think I have any really, really old books now that I think about it. I'll have to look. But yeah, that was good. It did. It had the morbid, it had the twisted, it had all of that stuff. And then it did. It had a nice happy ending. Oh, Works of Shakespeare. Oh, such a good one. Oh, that's awesome. Excellent. Well, all right. Shall we read the next? I think so. Because it is. It should be half the It should be half the length of the last one. They're setting you up for a fall with the next story. Maybe. No, I hope not. Although maybe. I do. Edgar Allan Poe, he had some twisty, like really powerful, affecting stuff. And it was just morbid all the way to the end and just, oh, and it was so good. So I'll take that too. I was just very pleasantly surprised with how that one turned out. I think it was because of that expectation that it really kind of hit. Because it was like, oh gosh, one of them's got to die. And then neither of them did. Yay! And it's all good and all happy, and everyone's happy. Yay. Excellent. So yeah, so that was the family portraits. And here we are at number 2 of Tales of the Dead and or Fantasmagoriana. Poe is something else. Reading his stuff was like a fever dream and you loved it. I know! And that's the thing. So when I did, that was why I kind of started this, was to read through all his stuff. And I would look it up to kind of get a sense of what it was so I could like explain it beforehand. And I would spoil some stuff for myself. But it didn't matter because it was just so good. And just the imagery of it. And it was amazing. Yeah. I did. I had such a great time reading Poe. I recommend it. I highly recommend it. Not even just his spoopy stuff, but like he did, I don't know if I've talked about this, but he's done, or he did like troll articles. Like so it was, he wrote articles to put into the like actual papers and stuff of, like scientific marvels and like aliens and stuff. And people actually believed it because that was his intention because he was a troll. So yeah, I did. I really enjoyed his stuff, and the fact that he could go from the one to the other so well. It's insane. So yeah, honestly, you found his crippling depression really relatable as well. Well, yeah, that too. That is also a thing. But read his troll stuff. That will help the crippling depression. It is. It's really funny. Very fascinating person. Yes, definitely. Oh, yes. I do. I miss this so much. I miss reading so much. So I'm happy to be back doing this. I'm happy you guys are hopefully enjoying it as well. As much as I am. Hopefully with snacks and candy for Halloween. But yeah. So we shall get started on this next one, and then that shall probably be it for this evening. So, number 2, The Fated Hour. Wan the maiden was, of saintly paleness, and there seemed to dwell in the strong beauties of her countenance something that was not earthly. Southeast Joan of Arc. The clock has tolled, and hark, the bell of death beats slow. Mason's Elegies. Oh. A heavy rain prevented the 3 friends from taking the morning's walk they had concerted, notwithstanding which Amelia and Maria failed not to be at Florentina's house at the appointed hour. The latter had for some time past been silent, pensive, and absorbed in thought, and the anxiety of her friends made them very uneasy at the visible impression left on her mind by the violent tempest of the preceding night. Florentina met her friends greatly agitated, and embraced them with more than usual tenderness. "Fine weather for a walk," cried Amelia. "How have you passed this dreadful night?" "Not very well, you may easily imagine. My residence is in too lonely a situation." "Fortunately," replied Maria, laughing, "it will not long be yours." "That's true," answered Florentina, sighing deeply. "The Count returns from his travels tomorrow, in the hope of soon conducting me to the altar." "Merely in the hope?" replied Maria. "The mysterious manner in which you uttered these words leads me to apprehend you mean to frustrate those hopes." "I? But how frequently in this life does hope prove only an untimely flower?" "My dear Florentina," said Maria, embracing her, "for some time past my sister and I have vainly attempted to account for your lost gaiety, and have been tormented with the idea that possibly family reasons have induced you, contrary to your wishes, to consent to this marriage which is about to take place." "Nice night for a walk, Terminator, before he murdered some guys for a set of clothes." Precisely. If a Terminator comes into the story, I will be most surprised. That would be the ultimate twist. Family reasons. Am I not then the last of our house, the only remaining one, whom the tombs of my ancestors have not as yet closed? And have I not for my Ernest that ardent affection which is natural to my time of life? Or do you think me capable of such duplicity, when I have so recently depicted to you, in the most glowing colors, the man of my heart's choice? What then am I to believe? Inquired Maria. Is it not a strange contradiction that a young girl, handsome and witty, rich and of high rank, and who, independently of these advantages, will not by her marriage be estranged from her family, should approach the altar with trembling? Florentina, holding out her hand to the two sisters, said to them, "How kind you are! I ought really to feel quite ashamed in not yet having placed entire confidence in your friendship, even on a subject which is to me, at this moment, incomprehensible. At this moment I am not equal to the task, but in the course of the day I hope to be sufficiently recovered. In the meanwhile, let us talk on less interesting subjects." The violent agitation of Florentina's mind was so evident at this moment that the two sisters willingly assented to her wishes. Thinking that the present occasion required trifling subjects of conversation, they endeavored to joke with her on the terrors of the preceding night. However, Maria finished by saying, with rather a serious air, "I must confess that more than once I have been tempted to think something extraordinary occurred. At first it appeared as if someone opened and shut the window of the room in which we slept, and then, as if they approached my bed, I distinctly heard footsteps. An icy trembling seized me, and I covered my face over with the clothes." "Alas!" exclaimed Amelia, "I cannot tell you how frequently I have heard similar noises, but as yet nothing have I seen." "Most fervently do I hope," replied Florentina in an awful tone of voice, "that neither of you will ever, in this life, be subject to a proof of this nature." The deep sigh which accompanied these words, and the uneasy look she cast on the two sisters, produced evident emotions in them both. "Possibly you have experienced such proof?" replied Amelia. "Not precisely so, but suspend your curiosity. This evening, if I am still alive, I mean to say that this evening I shall be better able to communicate all to you." Maria made a sign to Amelia, who instantly understood her sister. And thinking that Florentina wished to be alone, though evidently disturbed in her mind, they availed themselves of the first opportunity which her silence afforded. Her prayer book was lying open on the table, which, now perceiving for the first time, confirmed Maria in the idea she had conceived. In looking for her shawl, she removed a handkerchief which covered this book, and saw that the part which had most probably occupied Florentina before their arrival was the canticle on death. The three friends separated, overcome and almost weeping, as if they were never to meet again. Amelia and Maria awaited with the greatest impatience the hour of returning to Florentina. They embraced her with redoubled satisfaction, for she seemed to them more gay than usual. "My dear girls," said she to them, "pardon, I pray you, my abstraction of this morning. Depressed by having passed so bad a night, I thought myself on the brink of the grave, and fancied it needful to make up my accounts in this world and prepare for the next. I have made my will, and have placed it in the magistrate's hands. However, since I have taken a little repose this afternoon, I find myself so strong and in such good spirits that I feel as if I had escaped the danger which threatened me." "But, my dear," replied Maria, in a mild yet affectionate tone of reproach, "how could one sleepless night fill your mind with such gloomy thoughts?" "I agree with you on the folly of permitting it so to do, and had I encouraged sinister thoughts, that dreadful night would not have been the sole cause, for it found me in such a frame of mind that its influence was not at all necessary to add to my horrors. But no more of useless mystery. I will fulfill my promise, and clear up your doubts on many parts of my manner and conduct, which at present must appear to you inexplicable. Prepare yourselves for the strangest and most surprising events. But the damp and cold evening air has penetrated this room. It will therefore be better to have a fire lighted, that the chill which my recital may produce be not increased by any exterior cause." Just love the writing. While they were lighting the fire, Maria and her sister expressed great joy at seeing such a happy change in Florentina's manner, and the latter could scarcely describe the satisfaction she felt at having resolved to develop to them the secret which she had so long concealed. The three friends being alone, Florentina began as follows. You were acquainted with my sister Serafina, whom I had the misfortune to lose, but I alone can boast of possessing her confidence, which is the cause of my mentioning many things relative to her before I begin the history I have promised, in which she is the principal personage. From her infancy, Serafina was remarkable for several singularities. She was a year younger than myself, but frequently, while seated by her side, I was amusing myself with the playthings common to our age. She would fix her eyes, by the half hour together, as if absorbed in thought. She seldom took any part in our infantine amusements. This disposition greatly chagrined our parents, for they attributed Serafina's indifference to stupidity, and they were apprehensive this defect would necessarily prove an obstacle in the education requisite for the distinguished rank we held in society, my father being, next the prince, the first person in the country. They had already thought of procuring for her a canonry from some noble chapel, when things took an entirely different turn. Her preceptor, an aged man, to whose care they had confided her at a very early age, assured them that in his life he had never met with so astonishing an intellect as Serafina's. My father doubted the assertion, but an examination, which he caused to be made in his presence, convinced him that it was founded in truth. Nothing was then neglected to give Serafina every possible accomplishment. Masters of different languages, of music, and of dancing every day filled the house. But in a short time my father perceived that he was again mistaken, for Serafina made so little progress in the study of the different languages that the masters shrugged their shoulders, and the dancing master pretended that though her feet were extremely pretty, he could do nothing with them, as her head seldom took the trouble to guide them. By way of retaliation, she made such wonderful progress in music that she soon excelled her masters. She sang in a manner superior to that of the best opera singers. My father acknowledged that his plans for the education of this extraordinary child were now as much too enlarged as they were before too circumscribed, and that it would not do to keep too tight a hand over her, but would let her follow the impulse of her own wishes. This new arrangement afforded Serafina the opportunity of more particularly studying the science of astronomy, which was one they had never thought of as needful for her. You can, my friends, form but a very indifferent idea of the avidity with which, if so I may express myself, she devoured those books which treated on celestial bodies, or what rapture the globes and telescopes occasioned her when her father presented them to her on her 13th birthday. But the progress made in this science in our days did not long satisfy Serafina's curiosity. To my father's great grief, she was wrapped up in reveries of astrology, and more than once she was found in the morning occupied in studying books which treated on the influence of the stars, and which she had begun to peruse the preceding evening. My mother, being at the point of death, was anxious, I believe, to remonstrate with Serafina on this whim, but her death was too sudden. My father thought that at this tender age Serafina's whimsical fancy would wear off. However, time passed on, and he found that she still remained constant to a study she had cherished from her infancy. You cannot forget the general sensation her beauty produced at court, how much the fashionable versifiers of the day sang her graceful figure and beautiful flaxen locks, and how often they failed when they attempted to describe the particular and indefinable character which distinguished her fine blue eyes. I must say I have often embraced my sister, whom I loved with the greatest affection, merely to have the pleasure of getting nearer, if possible, to her soft angelic eyes, from which Serafina's pale countenance borrowed almost all its sublimity. She received many extremely advantageous proposals of marriage, but declined them all. You know her predilection in favor of solitude, and that she never went out but to enjoy my society. She took no pleasure in dress, nay, she even avoided all occasions which required more than ordinary expense. Those who were not acquainted with the singularity of her character might have accused her of affectation. So, hey, there is such a thing as familial love without that. Tisk tisk. Tisk tisk. But a very extraordinary particularity, which I by chance discovered in her just as she attained her 15th year, created an impression of fear on my mind which will never be effaced. On my return from making a visit, I found Seraphina in my father's cabinet, near the window, with her eyes fixed and immovable. Accustomed from her earliest infancy to see her in this situation, without being perceived by her, I pressed her to my bosom, without producing on her the least sensation of my presence. At this moment I looked towards the garden, and I there saw my father walking with this same Seraphina whom I held in my arms. "In the name of God, my sister!" exclaimed I, equally cold with the statue before me, who now began to recover. What? Okay, at the same time, my eye involuntarily returned towards the garden, where I had seen her, and there perceived my father alone, looking with uneasiness, as it appeared to me, for her. Looking with uneasiness, as it appeared to me, for her who, but an instant before, was with him. I endeavored to conceal this event from my sister. I endeavored to conceal this event from my sister, but in the most affectionate tone, she loaded me with questions to learn the cause of my agitation. I eluded them as well as I could and asked her how long she had been in the closet. She answered me, smiling, that I ought to know best, as she came in after me, and that if she was not mistaken, she had before that been walking in the garden with my father. Wait. Oh, okay, so she was joking. Okay, hang on. Okay. This ignorance of the situation in which she was but an instant before. Hang on. Now I'm all confused. This ignorance of the situation in which she was but an instant before did not astonish me on my sister's account, as she had often shown proofs of this absence of mind. At that instant, my father came in, exclaiming, "Tell me, my dear Seraphina, how you so suddenly escaped from my sight and came here. We were, as you know, conversing, and scarcely had you finished speaking, when, looking round, I found myself alone. I naturally thought that you had concealed yourself in the adjacent thicket, but in vain I looked there for you, and on coming into this room, here I find you." "It is really strange," replied Seraphina. "I know not myself how it has happened." From that moment I felt convinced of what I had heard from several persons, but what my father always contradicted, which was, that while Seraphina was in the house, she had been seen elsewhere. I secretly reflected also on what my sister had repeatedly told me, that when a child she was ignorant whether sleeping or awake. She had been transported to heaven, where she had played with angels, to which incident she attributed her disinclination to all infantine games. My father strenuously combated this idea, as well as the event to which I had been witness, of her sudden disappearance from the garden. "Do not torment me any longer," said he, "with these phenomena, which appear complacently renewed every day, in order to gratify your eager imagination. It is true that your sister's person and habits present many singularities, but all your idle talk will never persuade me that she holds any immediate intercourse with the world of spirits. My father did not then know that where there is any doubt of the future, the weak mind of man ought not to allow him to profane the word never by uttering it. About a year and half afterwards, an event occurred which had power to shake even my father's determined manner of thinking to its very foundation. It was on a Sunday that Seraphina and I wished at last to pay a visit which we had from time to time deferred. Notwithstanding my sister was very fond of being with me, she avoided even my society whenever she could not enjoy it, but in the midst of a large assembly, where constraint destroyed all pleasure. To adorn herself for a party was to her unanticipated torment. For she said she only submitted to this trouble to please those whose frivolous and dissipated characters greatly offended her. On similar occasions, she sometimes met with persons to whom she could not speak without shuddering, and whose presence made her ill for several days. That's fairly relatable. The hour of assembling approached. She was anxious that I should go without her. My father, doubting her, came into our room and insisted on her changing her determination. I cannot permit you to infringe every duty. He accordingly desired her to dress as quickly as possible and accompany me. The waiting maid was just gone out on an errand with which I had commissioned her. My sister took a light to fetch her clothes from a wardrobe in the upper story. She remained much longer absent than was requisite. At length she returned without a light. I screamed with fright. My father asked her in an agitated manner what had happened to her. In fact, she had scarcely been absent a quarter of an hour, and yet during that time her face had undergone a complete alteration. Her habitual paleness had given place to a death-like hue. Her ruby lips were turned blue. My arms involuntarily opened to embrace the sister whom I adored. I almost doubted my sight, for I could get no answer from her. But for a long while she leaned against my bosom, mute and inanimate. The look, replete with infinite softness, which she gave my father and me, alone informed us that during her continuance in this incomprehensible trance, she still belonged to the material world. I was seized with a sudden indisposition, she at length said in a low voice, but I now find myself better. She asked my father whether he still wished her to go into society. He thought that after an occurrence of this nature her going out might be dangerous, but he would not dispense with my making the visit, although I endeavored to persuade him that my attention might be needful to Seraphina. I left her with an aching heart. I had ordered the carriage to be sent for me at a very early hour, but the extreme anxiety I felt would not allow me to wait its arrival, and I returned home on foot. The servant could scarcely keep pace with me, such was my haste to return to Seraphina. On my arrival in her room, my impatience was far from being relieved. "Where is she?" I quickly asked. "Who, mademoiselle?" "Why, Seraphina." "Mademoiselle, Seraphina is in your father's closet." "Alone?" "No, with his excellency." I ran to the boudoir. The door, which was previously shut, at that instant opened, and my father with Seraphina came out. The latter was in tears. I remarked that my father had an air of chagrin and doubt which not even the storms of public life had ever produced in his countenance. He made us a sign full of gentleness, and Seraphina followed me into another room, but she first assured my father she would remember the promise he had exacted, and of which I was still ignorant. Seraphina appeared to me so tormented by the eternal conflicts she endured that I several times endeavored, but in vain, to draw from her the mysterious event which had so recently thrown her into so alarming a situation. At last I overcame her scruples, and she answered me as follows: "Your curiosity shall be satisfied in part. I will develop some of the mystery to you, but only on one irrevocable condition." I entreated her instantly to name the condition, and she thus continued: "Swear to me that you will rest satisfied with what I shall disclose to you, and that you will never urge nor use that power which you possess over my heart to obtain a knowledge of what I am obliged to conceal from you." I swore it to her. "Now, my dear Florentina, forgive me if, for the first time in my life, I have a secret from you, and also for not being satisfied with your mere word for the promise I have exacted from you. My father, to whom I have confided everything, has imposed these two obligations on me, and his last words were to that effect." I begged her to come to the point. "Words are inadequate to describe," said she, "the weight I felt my soul oppressed with when I went to get my clothes. I had no sooner closed the door of the room in which you and my father were, than I fancied I was about to be separated from life and all that constituted my happiness, and that I had many dreadful nights to linger through ere I could arrive at a better and more peaceful abode. The air which I breathed on the staircase was not such as usually circulates around us. It oppressed my breathing, and caused large drops of icy perspiration to fall from my forehead. Certain it is, I was not alone on the staircase, but for a long while I dared not look around me. You know, my dear Florentina, with what earnestness I wished and prayed, but in vain, that my mother would appear to me after her death, if only for once. I fancied that on the stairs I heard my mother's spirit behind me. I was apprehensive it was come to punish me for the vows I had already made. A strange thought, certainly. But how could I imagine that a mother, who was goodness itself, could be offended by the natural wishes of a tenderly beloved child, or have imputed them to indiscreet curiosity? It was no less foolish to think that she, who had been so long since enclosed in the tomb, should occupy herself in inflicting chastisement on me for faults which were nearly obliterated from my recollection. I was so immediately convinced of the weakness of giving way to such ideas that I summoned courage and turned my head. Although my affrighted survey could discover nothing, I again heard the footsteps following me, but more distinctly than before. At the door of the room I was about to enter, I felt my gown held. Overpowered by terror, I was unable to proceed, and fell on the threshold of the door. I lost no time, however, in reproaching myself for suffering terror so to overcome me, and recollected that there was nothing supernatural in this accident, for my gown had caught on the handle of an old piece of furniture which had been placed in the passage, to be taken out of the house the following day. This discovery inspired me with fresh courage. I approached the wardrobe, but judge my consternation when, preparing to open it, the two doors unclosed of themselves, without making the slightest noise. The lamp which I held in my hand was extinguished, and, as if I was standing before a looking-glass, my exact image came out of the wardrobe. The light which it spread illumined great part of the room. I then heard these words, "Why tremble you at the sight of your own spirit, which appears to give you warning of your approaching dissolution, and to reveal to you the fate of your house?" The phantom then informed me of several future events, but when, after having deeply meditated on its prophetic words, I asked a question relative to you, the room became as dark as before, and the spirit had vanished. This, my dear, is all I am permitted to reveal. "You're approaching death," cried I. That thought had in an instant effaced all other. Smiling, she made me a sign in the affirmative, and gave me to understand, at the same time, that I ought to press her no further on this subject. "My father," added she, "has promised to make you acquainted, in proper time, with all it concerns you to know." "At a proper time," repeated I, in a plaintive voice, for it appeared to me that since I had learned so much, it was high time that I should be made acquainted with the whole. The same evening I mentioned my wishes to my father, but he was inexorable. He fancied that possibly what had happened to Seraphina might have arisen from her disordered and overheated imagination. However, 3 days afterwards, my sister finding herself so ill as to be obliged to keep her bed, my father's doubts began to be shaken, and although the precise day of Seraphina's death had not been named to me, I could not avoid observing by her paleness, and the more than usual affectionate manner of embracing my father and me, that the time of our eternal separation was not far off. "Will the clock soon strike 9?" asked Seraphina, while we were sitting near her bed in the evening. "Yes, soon," replied my father. "Well then, think of me, dear objects of my affection. We shall meet again." She pressed our hands, and the clock no sooner struck than she fell back in her bed, never to rise more. My father has since related to me every particular as it happened, for at that time I was I was so much overcome that my senses had forsaken me. Seraphina's eyes were scarcely closed when I returned to a life which then appeared to me insupportable. I was apprehensive that the state of stupefaction into which I was thrown by the dread of the loss that threatened me had appeared to my sister a want of attachment, and from that time I have never thought of the melancholy scene without experiencing a violent shuddering. "You must be aware," said my father to me, it was at the precise hour, and before the same chimney we are at this moment placed, "you must be aware that the pretended vision should still be kept quite secret." I was of his opinion, but could not help adding, "What, still, my father, though one part of the prediction has, in so afflicting a manner, been verified, you continue to call it a pretended vision?" Yeah, exactly. "Yes, my child. You know not what a dangerous enemy to man is his own imagination. Seraphina will not be the last of its victims." We were seated, as I before said, just as we now are, and I was about to name a motive which I had before omitted, when I perceived that his eyes were fixed in a disturbed manner on the door. I was ignorant of the cause and could discover nothing extraordinary there. Notwithstanding, however, an instant afterwards, it opened of its own accord. Here Florentina stopped, as if overcome anew by the remembrance of her terror. At the same moment, Amelia rose from her seat, uttering a loud scream. Her sister and her friend inquired what ailed her. For a long while she made them no reply, and would not resume her seat on the chair, the back of which was towards the door. At length, however, she confessed, casting an inquiring and anxious look around her, that a hand, cold as ice, had touched her neck. "This is truly the effect of imagination," said Maria, reseating herself. "It was my hand. For some time my arm has been resting on your chair, and when mention was made of the door opening of its own accord, I felt a wish to rest on some living object. But apropos, and the door. Strange incident. I trembled with fear, and clinging to my father, asked him if he did not see a sort of splendid light, a something brilliant, penetrate the apartment. "'Tis well," answered he, in a low and tremulous voice. "We have lost a being whom we cherished, and consequently, in some degree, our minds are disposed to exalted ideas, and our imaginations may very easily be duped by the same illusions. Besides, there is nothing very unnatural in a door opening of its own accord." "It ought to be closely shut now," replied I, without having the courage to do it. "'Tis very easy to shut it," said my father. But he rose in visible apprehension, walked a few paces, and then returned, adding, "The door may remain open, for the room is too warm." Yeah, okay. It is impossible for me to describe, even by comparison, the singular light I had perceived, and I do assure you that if, instead of the light, I had seen my sister's spirit enter, I should have opened my arms to receive it, for it was only the mysterious and vague appearance of this strange vision which caused me so much fear. The servants coming in at this instant with supper put an end to the conversation. Time could not efface the remembrance of Seraphina, but it wore off all recollection of the last apparition. My daily intercourse with you, my friends, since the loss of Seraphina, has been for me a fortunate circumstance, and has insensibly become an indispensable habit. I no longer thought deeply of the prediction relative to our house, uttered by the phantom to my sister, and in the arms of friendship gave myself up entirely to the innocent gaiety which youth inspires. The beauties of spring contributed to the restoration of my peace of mind. One evening, just as you had left me, I continued walking in the garden, as if intoxicated with the delicious vapors emitted from the flowers, and the magnificent spectacle which the serenity of the sky presented to my view. Absorbed entirely by the enjoyment of my existence, I did not notice that it was later than my usual hour for returning, and I know not why, but that evening no one appeared to think of me, for my father, whose solicitude for everything concerning me was redoubled since my sister's death, and who knew I was in the garden, had not, as was his usual custom, sent me any garment to protect me from the chilling night air. While thus reflecting, I was seized with a violent feverish shivering, which I could by no means attribute to the night air. My eyes accidentally fixed on the flowering shrubs, and the same brilliant light which I had seen at the door of the room on the day of Seraphina's burial appeared to me to rest on these shrubs and dart its rays towards me. The avenue in which I happened to have been Seraphina's favorite walk. The recollection of this inspired me with courage, and I approached the shrubs in the hope of meeting my sister's shade beneath the trees. But my hopes being frustrated, I returned to the house with trembling steps. I there found many extraordinary circumstances. Nobody had thought of supper, which I imagined would have been half over. All the servants were running about in confusion, and were hastening to pack up the clothes and furniture. "Who is going away?" I demanded. "Why, surely, mademoiselle," exclaimed the steward, "are you not acquainted with His Excellency's wish to have us all?" "Wherefore, then? This very night we are we are to set out for His Excellency's estate. Why so? They shrugged their shoulders. I ran into my father's cabinet, and there found him with his eyes fixed on the ground. Seraphina's second prophecy is also accomplished, said he to me, though precisely the least likely thing possible. I am in disgrace. What? Did she predict this? Yes, my child, but I concealed it from you. I resign myself to my fate, and leave others better to fill this perilous post. I am about to retire to my own estates, there to live for you, and to constitute the happiness of my vassals. In spite of the violent emotions which were created by my father's misfortune, and the idea of separating from all the friends I loved, his apparent tranquillity produced a salutary effect on my mind. At midnight, we set off. My father was so much master of himself under his change of condition that by the time he arrived at his estate, got scared again, sorry. My father was so much master of himself under his change of condition that by the time he arrived at his estate, he was calm and serene. He found many things to arrange and improve, and his active turn of mind soon led him to find a train of pleasing occupations. In a short time, however, he was withdrawn from them by an illness which the physicians regarded as very serious. My father conformed to all they prescribed. He abstained from all occupation, though he entertained very little hope of any good resulting from it. Seraphina, he said to me, entirely changing his former opinion, Seraphina has twice predicted true, and will a third time. This conversation made me very miserable, for I understood from it that my father believed he should shortly die. In fact, he visibly declined, and was at length forced to keep his bed. He one evening sent for me, and after having dismissed his attendants, he, in a feeble voice and with frequent interruptions, thus addressed me. Experience has cured me of incredulity. When the clock strikes 9, according to Seraphina's prediction, I shall be no more. For this reason, my dear child, I am anxious to address a few words of advice to you. If possible, remain in your present state. Never marry. Destiny appears to have conspired against our race. But no more of this. To proceed, if ever you seriously think of marrying, do not, I beseech you, neglect to read this paper. But my express desire is that you do not open it beforehand, as in that case its contents would cause you unnecessary misery. Saying these words, which with sobbing I listened to, he drew from under his pillow a sealed paper, which he gave me. The moment was not favorable for reflecting on the importance of the condition which he imposed on me. The clock, which announced the fated hour, at which my father, resting on my shoulder, drew his last gasp, deprived me of my senses. The day of his interment was also marked by the brilliant and extraordinary light of which I have before made mention. You know that shortly after this melancholy loss I returned to the capital, in hopes of finding consolation in your beloved society. You also know that youth seconded your efforts to render existence desirable, and that by degrees I felt a relish for life. Neither are you ignorant that the result of this intercourse was an attachment between the Count Ernest and me, which rendered my father's exhortations abortive. The Count loved me, and I returned his affection, and nothing more was wanting to make me think that I ought not to lead a life of celibacy. Besides, my father had only made this request conditionally. My marriage appeared certain, and I did not hesitate to open the mysterious paper. Tisk, tisk. There it is. I will read it to you. Seraphina has undoubtedly already told you that when she endeavored to question the phantom concerning your destiny, it suddenly disappeared. The incomprehensible being seen by your sister had made mention of you, and its afflicting decree was that 3 days before that fixed on for your marriage, you would die at the same 9th hour which has been so fatal to us. Your sister, recovering a little from her first alarm, asked it if you could not escape this dreadful mandate by remaining single. I have a thought. Unhappily, Seraphina did not receive any answer, but I feel assured that by marrying you will die. For this reason I entreat you to remain single. I add, however, if it accords with your inclinations, as I do not feel confident that even this will ensure you from the effect of the prediction. In order, my dear child, to save you from all premature uneasiness, I have avoided this communication till the hour of danger. Reflect therefore seriously on what you ought to do. My spirit, when you read these lines, shall hover over and bless you, whatever way you decide. Florentina folded up the paper again in silence, and, after a pause, which her two friends sensibly felt, added, Possibly, my dear friends, this has caused the change in me which you have sometimes condemned. But tell me whether, situated as I am, you would not become troubled and almost annihilated by the prediction which announced your death on the very eve of your happiness. Here my recital ends. Tomorrow the Count returns from his travels. The ardor of his affection has induced him to fix on the 3rd day after his arrival for the celebration of our marriage. Then 'tis this very day, exclaimed Amelia and Maria at the same moment, paleness and inquietude depicted on every feature, when their eyes glanced to a clock on the point of striking 9. Yes, this is indeed the decisive day, replied Florentina, with a grave yet serene air. The morning has been to me a frightful one, but at this moment I find myself composed. My health is excellent and gives me a confidence that death would with difficulty overcome me today. Besides, a secret but lively presentiment tells me that this very evening the wish I have so long formed will be accomplished. My beloved sister will appear to me, and will defeat the prediction concerning me. Dear Seraphina, you were so suddenly, so cruelly snatched from me. Where are you, that I may return with tenfold interest the love that I have not the power of proving towards you? The two sisters, transfixed with horror, had their eyes riveted on the clock, which struck the fated hour. You are welcome, cried Florentina, seeing the fire in the chimney, to which they had paid no attention, suddenly extinguished. She then rose from her chair, and with open arms walked towards the door which Maria and Amelia anxiously regarded, whilst sighs escaped them both, and at which entered the figure of Seraphina, illumined by the moon's rays. Florentina folded her sister in her arms. I am thine forever. These words, pronounced in a soft and melancholy tone of voice, struck Amelia and Maria's ears, but they knew not whether they were uttered by Florentina or the phantom, or whether by both the sisters together. Almost at the same moment the servants came in, alarmed to learn what had happened. They had heard a noise as if all the glasses and porcelain in the house were breaking. They found their mistress extended at the door, but not the slightest trace of the apparition remained. Every means of restoring Florentina to life were used, but in vain. The physicians attributed her death to a ruptured blood vessel. Maria and Amelia will carry the remembrance of this heart-rending scene to their graves. Oh, come on! It was! The first one was all a trick! Oh my gosh! Now I'm upset. Oh, but it was good. Oh, but it was good. I did. Towards the end, I had to, make sure I kept the text a little below what I was reading. Otherwise, I would have read ahead. Gosh darn it. Ugh. And then again, there's the whole thing about, no explanations, because it's spiritual and psychical, and you told me you did. Ugh, dang it. Ugh, I should have listened. But it was good, though. Oh, it was so good. All the way through it was like is it gonna happen? Is it not? And that's the thing that I'm really liking about these, is that you really don't know how it's gonna go down. Yeah, that was good. It was. Crisis Spirit. I don't know. Seraphina? Is that a specific something? Like an actual technical term? I'm in perfect health. I'm great. My sister will save me. Dies. No. Oedipus! That's the one. The trying to outwit fate sort of thing, and instead causing it. Yeah. So that was the Fated Hour. The first two, the Family Portraits and the Fated Hour, the first two of Fantasmagoriana, Tales of the Dead in English. So yeah, that was that. Oh, that was so good. I'm very pleased with these. I was having trouble trying to find good ones, good spoopy stories. But I'm pleased. Crisis spirits are when someone nears death, so their spirit seeks someone relevant to them. The person usually dies shortly after. Oh, interesting. So, so that would be the Florentina situation. But would that also be the Serafina situation? And just from her, what's the word? Her disposition. That's why she saw herself? Question mark. Interesting. Or, are we thinking Florentina was just, ooh. Well, and again, and this is what I love about literature is being able to like expound. Is that the correct word? From it, like kind of anything, because you could again looking for the explanations or whatever, but like from the ruptured blood vessel, could like that whole thing have been just like a hallucinatory, sort of, yeah, thing on her part. But no, I like it. I definitely like it as it was. But that was so interesting, and the fact that they didn't really give any like full explanation of why Serafina was the way she was. Oh, so good. Oh, so good. I'm so pleased. Yes. Ah, amazing. Excellent. Yeah. So that was that. I'm so excited. It was a good start to the literary third of Spooktober. Honestly, you're half paying attention because now that you finished a project, you're gearing up to start another, as you do. But the reading is relaxing. I'm glad that it's not my voice is not too great for it. But yeah. It is so good. It's so good. And it's so subtle. Like it doesn't need all the morbidity, the macabre. Like again, and even in the first one where it just had that little bit of subtlety with like the bloody child. But other than that, it was just that creeping and unnerving um stuff. So so good. The mentality of it. I love it. So good. She danced with what she described as angels, but phantoms were what appeared. Ooh. Ooh, interesting. Oh. Mm. So are we thinking? Well, and it could be, and this is the thing, it could be. Was Seraphina's phantom a demonic thing? And it was her believing in it that doomed them all. I don't know. More substance, less fluff. Exactly. And yeah, and like sometimes it seems like you need the fluff, but then you get stuff like this, and it's just so tight. And I love it. So good. So good. Oh, so happy. So yeah, so this is what there's 6 of these. So these are the first 2. Hoping to do 2 next week, 2 the following week, and then I think we'll read The Darkness and the Vampire that were um inspired apparently by these for our final reading uh reading stream. So that's kind of the thought. as I said before, I'm not going to be able to read Frankenstein. It's like 5 to 7 hours of reading. But I don't know. At some point, maybe we'll get to that point, but I would definitely need breaks. So yeah, I'll get that, and it'll be I'll go like that, and then we'll show the apparent cover. Whoa, so good. Yeah. So that was Spoopy Stories. Very pleased with it. Very good. What day is it? It's Thursday. So Sunday, I have to figure out the Spoopy game. You sent me one. I'll have to look at it. Actually, I don't know what it actually is, so you'll have to actually send that bit to me. Otherwise, I still have to look at the Steam games that I have. But we'll do something spoopy. Whether or not it's actually horror or more just Halloweeny, we'll see. And on Tuesday, we'll be back with more flying, which will probably continue doing VATSIM since it is scary, and we will keep with the spoopy theme, as well as continuing to practice the commercial maneuvers. And yeah, yep, that's the plan. So can we call my IMC streams the Faded Hour? No! I did not die. Oh, wait, I have died in those before. But that was only when I paused and the physics continued. Dang it. You just remembered a free horror game on Steam? You'll go find that? Okay, sounds good. Let me know. I have looked in the past. It has. It's been a little while. So I'm sure there are more out since I actually put my list together. But I'm looking forward to it. I had a really great time with Haunt last week, so that was good. You found it? It's Passing of Pineview Forest. I haven't heard of that, so I will have to look at that. Passing, hang on. Extremely simple but suspenseful. How long is it? It is 19 to 36 minutes. So we will also need at least one more. Awesome. Okay. Oh, hang on. Passing Pineview Forest is a free mini prequel set in the universe of Pineview Drive. Behind the abandoned house on Pineview Drive lies ominous Pineview Forest. Okay. Buy Pineview Drive. Okay. Pineview Drive is $20. You can cut the tension with a knife. Nice. It's a short, contained experience similar to Haunt. Okay, sounds good. I do want to try different things too. So I don't want to just stick with the same thing. So definitely will do this one, but then we'll try something probably at least a little bit different. Because I'm not that creative, so we got to get different experiences in the mind so I can be somewhat interesting. But yeah, sounds good. You suggest good headphones though? Audio is important. I got what I got. I could try to hook up my my light speeds to it. Could I? Might be able to. I don't know. I'm sure I'll be good. I'll just have it up very loud and that'll be good for the spoops. But we'll figure it out. So yeah, so that's a plan. Games on Sunday with snacks, jelly beans, flying on Tuesday, and more Fantasmagoriana Tales of the Dead. So excellent. I'm so pleased. On Thursday. For Spooktober, I hope you're all having a wonderful Spooktober. It still hasn't really felt spoopy yet. Kind of. Like in doing this stuff, it feels spoopy, but it's still got to get there a little bit. But that was that. Spoopy Stories, Tales of the Dead, Fantasmagoriana. So to whoever got lost and found their way here, or found their way back, thanks for being here. Thanks for putting up with me. Thanks for hopefully enjoying the stories as much as I did. So good. And yeah, Have a great whatever it's going to be for you. Hope to see you again soon. And if I forgot anything, as always, brain is mush. But yeah, sorry. But yeah, I think that's everything. So thank you again. And